I don't. So if I'm off on protocol, just correct me. But I'll just treat it like a Zoom. You know.
Oh, that's fine. So, hey everybody. Today is June 2nd, 2023. It's about 10 p.m. here in Indiana. I'm Chris Lucas. This is the Protestant View. Today I got a special guest on. Oops. Oh gosh. Sorry. I gotta cut this. There we go. Sorry, I had another window open. It was
No
repeating.
problem.
So, anyway, I'm Chris Lucas. This is the Protestant View. I got a special guest on today. It's a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, John. Right?
John, yes, and I should say I'm an elder, but I've been acting as my senior pastor says I've been acting as a lay pastor for a while. So just to clarify for everyone.
Okay. And as you can see up on the screen, Angels in the Glen is that the name of your ministry, right?
Correct.
All right, yeah, and so I'm pleased to have you join me. It's really nice to talk to someone kind of high. I mean, at least someone more official. And there's a couple of Seventh-day Adventists that actually recommended that I try to talk to you. So
Okay, great.
I see them out in the audience.
Great.
Anyway. I don't know where you want to start. Did you want to open up in prayer or?
Yeah, could I do that real quick?
Yeah,
I
sure.
know
I'll let you
I
do
can't
that.
see everyone in there, so I'll just have to cue off of you if there's any questions or comments that they might have. Yeah, I'll just open up in a quick prayer.
That's
Father
fine with me.
God, I just thank you for this opportunity to talk with Chris and the others that are on this link. I just appreciate your grace and your love towards us. May we never forget that you love us and that you redeemed all of us. And Lord, I just pray that your Holy Spirit would guide all of us in this discussion and this conversation, because we want to see Jesus and we want to be ready when you return. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So do you need me to share your screen or anything?
I probably at some point that might be helpful because I've got some graphics that I want to put up, but
Yeah,
I can start
anytime
off.
you want me to, you just hit the present button, pick whatever screen, whether it's a window or I don't know, whatever app it should let you pick, or if you just want to share the full screen.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you got more than one monitor and you can just share the full screen, or you can share whatever monitor you're looking at.
Okay, let me do a quick test. It's different than Zoom. I'm used to Zoom, but oh, I see. I'm going to have to share. Let me just do a quick share screen.
Yeah, that's fine. And it should give me the option to add it whenever you're ready. Because I can't see nothing until you allow me to see whatever.
Okay. All right. Let me see. Let's see this one.
Yeah.
Can you see that screen?
Yeah, I can see right there. That's how it works.
Okay. All right.
Is that working for you?
Yeah, I can see it's telling me stop. Yeah, I can stop sharing. But yeah, this is so basically, I think this is the heart of your question. Or do you want to phrase your question first?
Well, okay. So the heart of my question would be in it's going to be revolving around the 2300 in Daniel chapter 8, because I think the text shows basically a chronology that says there's the large horn. Maybe I should even bring up a screen on my own just to show people real quick what I'm talking about.
Okay. But I think I understand the basic premise of your point, which is how can the 2300 evenings and mornings happen after the large horn, after Greece?
Right, because there's a lot of people that, if here's one thing too. If you walk into the average church and you go, "Hey, when did Alexander the Great die?" Right. I bet you're gonna have a tough time walking across someone that can be like 323 BC.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the problem with this whole eschatology thing too, is people read this. Who knows when King Belshazzar lived, or when Alexander the Great conquered Medo-Persia, or when Alexander the Great died. So just so the audience out there knows, my problem is when we're reading Daniel 8, I feel like there is a chronology here where you have like this ram conquering the goat in verse 5.
Yep.
And I guess it's like verse 5 through 7. You got a ram conquering the goat, and later down in verses 20 on down, it tells you the ram's Medo-Persia, the goat is Greece,
Right.
and conquers it. And then Alexander the Great is the large horn. We all agree on that. He's the king of Greece.
Yep.
And so he gets broken, and then up from it comes 4, and then the little horn comes out of one of the 4. And so Alexander the Great conquers Medo-Persia and I think it's 331 BC, and he dies in 323 BC. And it would seem like then there's 4 kingdoms, then the little horn. Well, if the little horn comes after all that, then it has to start sometime after 323 BC.
Correct.
So that's the basic question I'm posing to Pastor John.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. It's an excellent question. And I think what we have to do is take a look at 2 things. I'm going to answer that question right now. So here's the issue. 1, you followed the ram, then the goat. There's no question about that. Ram, goat, Medo-Persia, then Greece. And then we move to the large horn that's broken. And so those 4 horns are basically Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, and Ptolemy. Those are the 4, when Alexander the Great dies, he basically does it. He's a poor succession planner. And his 4 generals basically split up the kingdom. And I've got some graphics that I could show, but that's I think we're all agree in terms of that. Correct? I just want to make sure we have certain.
Yes, yeah. See, that's what I would agree with 100%. Those you got the 4 kingdoms right off. I mean, you're right on about that. Yeah.
Okay. So now notice what it says. Let's take a closer look at verse 8. And just say, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken. Okay, Alexander the Great, because that's the first king. And in his place, there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. Okay, that's Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, and Ptolemy. Now look at this, the verse 9. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great. Now, notice this in verse 9. There's 2 phases to this little horn power. There's a horizontal geographic political conquering, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. But notice verse 10, it transitions. It has a vertical phase. It says it grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the hosts and some of the stars to fall. Now I'm going to assert that horn that came up, that grew exceedingly great, it's talking about Rome. All right, so after the Greek Macedonian Empire in 168 BC, Rome emerges as the next empire coming up. Now, the reason why we can confidently say that is because we're building off the patterns of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, which I don't know if you've covered in your discussions here. So what I'd like to do is kind of show you a graphic just to show you how we view the sequence of events. And this is important because I'm getting to the point to answer your question. So
that's fine.
Let me see if I can, let me share the screen if I can.
Sure.
If it comes up. So let's see. I want to show this one right. Let me see. Tell me if, can you see that? Can you see me flipping to different screens?
Yeah, I see that on the left side.
On the left? Okay. So I'm going to go all the way back. These are all slides that I present on the channel, and I walk through it in detail. But basically, I'm going to go back to this. What we're building off of is this pattern. And I'll go through it really quickly. In Daniel 2, we basically have this pattern of a metal man image, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thigh of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. We conclude that it's successive world kingdoms from Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome to Europe. Some may say divided Europe, or the successor states of Europe from the barbarian tribes that emerged. Then a stone follows that, strikes the base of that image, destroys it entirely, and it grows up into a great mountain, fills all the earth. That's Daniel 2. Basically, the pattern is successive world kingdoms, followed by the second return of Christ, and then God's eternal kingdom. Now, Daniel 7 follows the same pattern. And so if we fill that in, we can say, okay, there's a lion, there's a bear, there's a leopard, there's a beast, there's 10 horns. We're getting a little bit more detail. We're expanding on the first of the dream in Daniel 2 and getting a few more details. We have this 10 horns and a little horn, but this court sat and books are opened, and a son of man is given a kingdom. That's pointing to Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ himself in the New Testament would basically say, it was his most favorite title, the Son of Man. He would say it, I think, 77 or 78 times, the Son of Man, Son of Man, Son of Man, referring to himself. So Christ is given a kingdom here. And then basically it talks about in verses 13 and 14, I don't have the Bible open to that, but his dominion is everlasting. It won't pass away. It will never be destroyed. Same pattern of Daniel 2. What's happening in Daniel 8 is essentially the same thing. We're going to see more details come out. So like we have this pattern of Daniel 2, and I'm just looking at the successive world kingdoms portion of it right now. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8 does the same thing. And so let me do this. Given that, I want to pause on that, and I want to share with you, I want to start to give you the basic framework for the entire book of Daniel, or the Daniel 8. And it really, the key verse is right here in Daniel 8:26. Because Daniel essentially sees two visions. And you might say, whoa, what are you talking about? Two visions. Daniel 8:26, I have it on the screen. And the vision of the evenings and mornings, which has been told is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Now, on this next slide, I've colored those two words, vision and vision, because they're actually two different Hebrew words. And they basically represent kadzon and mare. And when we understand the distinction between these two Hebrew words in the book of Daniel, we now understand that Daniel actually is seeing two visions. And that's the important thing to understand for Daniel 8. Now I will say this. I don't say this in the video, but but basically the two words mare and kadzon in the Hebrew essentially mean the same thing. It's a revelation, sight, appearance. To get technical, though, kadzon is normally seen in the mind mentally, like a dream, or in a vision in a dream, whereas mare is something that is seen with the eyes, like physically seen with the eyes, iris, hitting the rods and cones. But essentially, it means the same thing. You're seeing something, all right, whether in the mind or physically in the eyes. Now, notice this. In Daniel 8:26, if I were to insert the Hebrew words, and the vision and the mare of the evenings and mornings, which has been told is true, but keep the kadzon secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Now, if we let me skip down to this one right here. Now, notice this. In Daniel 8:27, Daniel says this: he's exhausted and sick for days, and then he got up and carried on the king's business, but he's astounded at the mare, and there was none to explain it. Now, given that, let's go all the way back to Daniel to verse 1, because I want to show you the distinction between the different visions that he sees. And I'm going to skip over the successive world kingdoms because I want you to see this emergence of the different visions. In Daniel 8, verses 1 and 2, it starts off with the kadzon. Kadzon, kadzon, kadzon. And that sets the stage for the ram, the goat, the little horn. And if you, and those are the first three instances of the word kodzon for vision. Now, I'm going to skip over this, but I'll go through this very quickly. In Daniel 8, verses 3 and 4, you see that ram. All right, no guessing about who the ram is, Medo-Persia. I have a picture of Medo-Persian Empire right here. And notice that it moves in three directions in verses. I'm just looking at my Bible right now. Yeah, verse 4. It's budding westward, northward, southward. Right, so I just have an arrow of their conquering. And I use the acronym, does that ring a bell? BEL. I have it up there on the right-hand side screen. You know, they conquered Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. Now, historically, that's out of order. It was actually Babylon, Lydia, then Egypt. But Bel is easy to remember. So that's how I,
Oh, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. It's just there various little mnemonics that help just to remember those things. So there's those directions. Now so we can start plugging this in. Now, what I do is I put kodzon up here because that's where Daniel 8:1 begins. Now, some people say, well, wait a second. What about, so if we plug that in, we know that the ram, one horn longer, west, north, and south, it matches the bear with three ribs in its mouth, bell. Does that ring a bell? Raised up on one side, one horn longer than the other. There's no question you're following the pattern of Daniel 2 and 7. Some people say, well, why doesn't Babylon appear? Well, the point's been made in Daniel 2 and 7. We're moving on to greater detail, but it's true that it does happen in the third year of Belshazzar. So Babylon's there in one broad sense. The one thing I want to point out that is new is it says it magnified itself in verse 5 or 4 at the end of verse 4. It magnified himself. Just hold on to that. I placed that little piece of information over there on the right-hand side. Now we move on to, hold on one second. Let me move on to the next couple of verses. So we have Daniel 8, 5 through 8. And we're moving into the goat, and it's moving quickly, and it takes over the ram, doesn't touch the ground. Large horn is broken, then four horns in its place. So there's no question about it. We know the goat is described in 8:21 as Greece. The large horn is the first king. Four horns. That's consistent with Daniel 7. In terms of speed, four wings of the leopard versus the goat not touching the ground. And then the four heads of the leopard, again, this is Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, and Ptolemy. Again, four horns, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, and Ptolemy. No question about that. But this goat now magnifies itself exceedingly. So I'm just going to place that over there. This is significant as we start to go deeper into Daniel. Now, if I keep going, some of these are black and white, sorry. I'm going to point this out. This is a bit of a detail, and it's not a super strong argument, but I just wanted to point it out. And that is, when you look at this, out of one of them, verse 9, out of one of them came forth a rather small horn. It grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful land. You have to say, out of one of them what? Out of the conspicuous horns. Now, horns is italicized, so it's not in the original text, but towards the four winds of heaven. Which is it, the horns or the winds of heaven? Well, Hebrew has female and masculine genders, so let's try to match it up. So if you say out of one of them is masculine, so you would be naturally inclined to say, okay, it must be pointing more towards the winds of heaven. Again, not a super strong argument, but I just wanted to point that out because it's very difficult for a horn to come out of a horn if you try to force the symbology.
Well, I always thought the horns came out of other horns, like in Daniel 7, you got the little horn that comes out of one of the 10 horns, right?
Well, no, in Daniel 7, though, it actually comes up from among the 10 horns. If you go back to Daniel 7 and just look at verse let's see, look at it should be 8. It says, Daniel 7, verse 8, while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up from among them. So it's coming up from among the 10 horns. And I don't know, can you still see my hands or can see my face?
Yeah.
Oh, you can? Okay, yeah. So,
well, yeah, if I need to bring you back into the screen, I can bring us back into the screen too. I just didn't want to.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I can go back but I just wanted to point that out. They don't come out of the horns, they come up from among them, and they're part of the beast. And I'll just point this out, the whole 10 horns, this is black and white, but the 10 horns that come up in Daniel 7 here, it's matching the feet of iron and clay in terms of 10 toes. Now that's a symbolic number. Now we know that the successor states of the Roman Empire varied over time. It wasn't exactly 10. I know some of my denomination will argue 10, and it's true, they could count 10 depending on the specific time during the Middle Ages. But if you look at it, the total expanse of the Middle Ages, it varied. So we view 10 as symbolic, or I view 10 as symbolic. But here's the thing that I want to point out. Notice this. If you accept the premise that out of one of them it's the winds of heaven, then it says, came forth a rather small horn which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, towards the beautiful land. Again, in the sequence, you're going from Greece, now you're going to Rome. And I put a diagram of the Roman Empire. This is the greatest extent, which is fascinating to see that. And if you look, it grew toward the south. Okay, we know those were the Punic Wars. It grows toward the east. We know those there are the Macedonian Wars. And it grows towards the beautiful land, which is Judea, Palestinian region. So that's consistent with geographic, historical. And when you look at the verse 9, it says, it grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful. That exceedingly great is consistent with the historic Roman Empire in terms of the geographical expanse that it had conquered at the time. Now, here's the twist. Notice in verse 10, it says, it grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the stars and some hosts to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host. Now, I put that graphic, the geographic representation of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent on the slide there, to ask this question. If it grew exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east of the beautiful land, how does it grow up? How is that possible? Now, I guess I could graphically, have a vector coming out of the screen growing up, right? But what this is pointing to is the two phases of the Roman Empire. It's really talking about, this is a spiritual attack on the church. Because after the cross of Christ, we move to the church of God. And so stars, and I won't go through all these scriptures because I really want to answer your question about the two visions. But I go through and I explain, Abraham talks about, Abraham is told to look at the sky. He look at the host of heaven, look at the stars, so will your descendants be. And so these stars are, I'll just like Genesis 15, 5, 6. Stars, if you're able to count them, shall be your descendants. Again, to Isaac, descendants of stars of heaven.
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Okay. Yep. So, and we are citizens of heaven. I just pulled this scripture up, Philippians 3:17. Our citizenship is in heaven. Okay. So when it grows up to the host of heaven and cause some of the stars to fall, this is an attack on the church because we are connected to Christ after the cross of Christ. And you think about the story of Saul on his road to Damascus. He's about to persecute the Christians, and Christ himself, encounters him and basically says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And the question is, well, how in the world could Saul be persecuting Christ who's already risen to heaven? It's because he's attacking the church. And Christ is the head and the church is the body. So that's why this attack here, I'm going to go back to this attack here is an attack on the church of God, because it's attacking that. It trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host. Now in the Hebrew, commander of the host, commander, sar of the host, there's one, I don't know if I have this scripture. Yeah, I should have it in here, but basically it's pointing to Joshua 5. Basically, Joshua's about to go into Jericho, and he meets up with this man with a sword in his hand. And he asks this interesting question: are you for us or our adversaries? And he says, no, rather I indeed come now as the captain of the host. Now see, captain of the host, that's the equivalent of commander of the host. It's both sar in Hebrew. Now notice this, though. Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed and said, what has my Lord to say to his servant? And then the captain of the Lord's host, same thing, sar of the Lord's host, said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy. Now, the only other place where that is said in the Bible, to remove your sandals from your feet, is Moses, and he's talking directly with God. So this captain of the host, this is the pre-incarnate Christ Jesus appearing before Joshua. And so when it says it made itself equal with the commander of the host, this is where it gets very interesting, because this small horn that grew exceedingly great, southeast beautiful land, is the horizontal conquest. That's the small horn. That's the horizontal conquest. But then it grew up to the host of heaven, attacked God's people. That's the vertical element of it. And now it magnifies itself equal to Christ himself. That's why these three magnified itself exceedingly, now equal to the commander of the host. And that is what Lucifer did. Lucifer in Isaiah 14, we won't go there, but basically says, I will raise my throne above the stars of heaven. I will lift myself up. I will be like the Most High. He doesn't want to be greater than him. He wants to be equal. That's why he says, I will be like the Most High. Now, he wanted the likeness of the power of Christ, but he didn't want the character of Christ, the humility, the forgiving, loving kindness character. So let's do this. I want to get to the heart of this so you understand where we're taking this. Oh, here's one other point to make. What's the difference between the beasts of Daniel 7 and Daniel 8? Because here you have really carnivorous beasts, so to speak, right? Lion, bear, leopard, a beast with large iron teeth, devours. So it's a consuming beast. But then you have a ram and a goat. And so what this is basically indicating is you're now really talking about sanctuary imagery. Again, all of this is symbolic, but you're now really talking about sanctuary imagery here. And now it's making itself equal with the commander of the host, who is in his heavenly high priest ministry right now. Now, if we keep moving on, I want to lay this groundwork, because this is going to really answer your question. If you go back, I guess I could stop sharing, but if you can still see me, I'd like to use my hands a bit. But
do you want me to blow the screen up? I can.
No, it's okay. You if you can see me and the screen, that's really good. I just like to talk to people in person, so I can't see.
Yeah, I can maybe do it that way. I think they can still see it. If anyone has a problem, just let me know.
Okay. But what I want to point out to you is this, because when we get to verses 10, 11, and 12 of Daniel 8, we have to go back to Daniel 1 to really understand the theme of Daniel. And the theme of Daniel is really in the first two verses. Now, yes, there's 12 chapters in the book of Daniel, and there's 357 verses. But in the first two verses, we get the entire theme of the entire book. And if we understand that, we understand the book. Now, some people may say, whoa, the first two verses don't look very promising. That looks pretty difficult, because here King Nebuchadnezzar besieges Jerusalem and takes God's people captive and takes the vessels of God out and puts them in his temple. And what this is it's a pattern of what the future Antichrist would do to God's people during the church age. Because just as there's a literal and spiritual application here. Because the literal application is there's physical, literal, geographic, ancient Jerusalem. And Nebuchadnezzar attacks the city, takes Israel, or I should say more specifically Judah, and the sanctuary is destroyed at a later date, but I'm just summarizing at the highest level. Sanctuary is destroyed, vessels are taken. And for 70 literal years. And the spiritual application is this. When that little horn, the Antichrist power, attacks the church, it's spiritual and it's worldwide. And it's in the future, at least from Daniel's perspective. It's an attack on heavenly Jerusalem, which means it's an attack on the church because Christ and the church are connected. The church is taken captive. And I explained this I think I explained this in the Daniel 1 video, but I'll re-explain it here. But basically, when the sanctuary is destroyed and the vessels are taken, you think about the vessels in the house of God and you say, well, you've got a lampstand, you've got a table of showbread, you've got the altar of incense. Obviously, Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant and hid it, but those other things were taken, and you say, well, what could that mean spiritually? What's the spiritual manifestation of that? Well, we know that Christ is the bread of life. Christ is the light of the world. He is. So this is an attack on Christ himself, the ministry of Christ during the Middle Ages. So I'm just going to say right now, the ministry of Christ is impacted in a negative way. And there'll be a spiritual time period that the church is taken captive for. And that's that time, times, and half a time. Again, we view that as symbolic because all the symbols in Daniel 7 and 8, or all, I should say, all the prophecies are largely couched in symbols with, you've got beasts representing kingdoms. You've got winds of heaven representing strife. You've got the great sea, which represent peoples, nations, multitudes, and tongues. So all this symbology is wrapped in Daniel 7 and 8. So we have to be careful not to force fit a literal application of the time period. The time period would also need to be symbolic to be consistent. And that's exactly what happened historically. So now here's why I point this out. Because keep in your mind Daniel 1, verse 1 and 2, where that Nebuchadnezzar attacks the city, the sanctuary, takes God's people captive. Notice the same pattern is exhibited in Daniel 8, 10 through 12. And I've highlighted some of these things in color so you can see them a little bit better because I'll pull them out to the right-hand side. So here, host of heaven trampled them down. This is basically talking about heavenly Jerusalem and the saints, which is God's church on earth. It magnified himself equal with the commander of the host, which is Jesus Christ. It says it removed the regular sacrifice from him. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but that's not the best translation. And I use the NASB, but the better way to say it is the daily. I know the King James Version will say the daily sacrifice, but it's really is hatamid in Hebrew, the daily. So it removed the daily from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. The place is in Hebrew makon. It means foundation. The foundation of his sanctuary is thrown down. And an account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn. See, the saints are taken captive because of their transgression. That's exactly what happened in Daniel 1, verse 1. Why did the Lord allow King Nebuchadnezzar to attack the city? Because in 2 Chronicles 36, it talks about how he sent messenger after messenger after messenger because he had compassion on his people and his dwelling place. But they mocked, they despised, and they basically just utterly rejected those prophets that were telling them to turn back to God. And God had no other recourse but to say, okay, I've got to send you in exile. I've got to discipline you. And you're going to go to Babylon. But the good news is you're going to come out. I'm going to return you to the place. And what's happening is the church lost the truths of the Bible, trying to accommodate. We can talk more about the history of Constantine and everything with what he did at the Edict of Milan, and then the Roman Church, the Roman Empire adopts, Christianity as the official state religion in 380 AD, which is unprecedented when you think about it. I mean, the idea that they're a polytheistic pagan culture, pagan empire, and yet by 380 AD, they adopt Christianity and adopt the Theodosian law code, and incorporate 65 laws, religious laws regarding the right way and the wrong way to practice Christianity. Because if you didn't do it a certain way, you were considered a heretic, and you could be tried by the law, and the church had control over that. So that's the saints taken captive. Now, I say all that with all that backdrop. Now I'm going to skip ahead because I want to. There's a whole separate study that I do on the regular sacrifice, but I want you to see how and why the 2300 days happens before this little horn power, and what's the connection. So let's go back to so far so good. I can't see you, so I'm
yeah.
Okay.
So far so good, man.
Okay, so here's what I want to jump to. I want to go back to this whole idea of the Mare Had zone. Now Daniel sees that. So I'll summarize. So in Daniel 8, verse 1 and 2, it's that he sees this Cod zone. He sees the ram, he sees the goat, then he sees this horn broken, 4 horns. Then he sees this little horn, horizontal geographic conquest exceedingly great. Then it grows up to the host of heaven, equal the commander of the host. Now, if you keep reading along, and then you get to verse 13, and I'll pull up verse 13. Let's see if I can pull up verse 13. Where is that? Well, I'll just read it, and I don't think I have it right here. Well, let's see, 15 through 17. So it says, well, follow me along with 13. I don't have it up on the screen, but basically, then I heard, so Daniel sees all this. He sees all of that. That's all talking about this Had zone. Then in verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision, okay, that word vision right there, that's Cod zone, right? How long will the Cod zone about the regular sacrifice? I should say about the daily hatamid. How long will the vision, the Cod zone, about the daily apply? While the transgressors causes horror, so as allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled. He said to me, for 2300 evening and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. It can also be rendered restored, cleansed, vindicated. I'll come back to that in a minute. But notice verse 15, and now I have this up on the screen. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, okay, that word vision is Cod zone, I sought to understand it. And naturally, Daniel sees ram, goat, little horn, transgression causes horror. What's going on? And then look, and behold, all of a sudden, attention is shifted. Behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man. Now that word looked, that's the Hebrew word for mare, which is vision as well, but it's translated here looked. But the original Hebrew is mare. So Daniel sees this ram, goat, little horn, transgression causes horror. How long? 2300. Daniel seeks to understand the vision, and then all of a sudden, the scene changes. Before me, one who looked like a man. Now that man it's Geber in the Hebrew. It can also mean warrior, one who has ability to fight. And then notice verse 16. It says, and I heard the voice of a man between the banks of the Uli. And he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. Now, isn't that interesting? He says, give this man an understanding of the mare. He doesn't initially say, give him an understanding of the vision of the Cod zone. He says, give this man an understanding of the mare. Now, look at verse 17. It gives us a clue. So he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision, the Cod zone, pertains to the time of the end. Now let's keep going. Verse 18. Now while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, and he touched me and made me stand upright. He said, behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. Now he's just reassuring Daniel. He's going to tell him about what is going to happen at the end. He doesn't use the word kadzon in here, but he's saying, I'm going to let you know. And when we zoom out a bit, we see that Gabriel actually comes back to Daniel in chapter 9 and 10. In chapter 9, he's going to explain the mare to him. In chapter 10, he's going to explain the kadzon to him. That's the biggest thing here. Now, here's what I want to point out here, and I'm going to jump ahead to this key verse. After, I'm going to come back to verses 20 through 25. But what I want you to see right now is this. And the vision of the evenings and mornings, which has been told, is true. So Gabriel explains the mare to Daniel. And I already know the question you're going to ask. You're going to say, well, why does he begin explaining the mare in verse 20? If he's told to explain the mare, notice what it says in verse 20. In fact, let me go back here. I'm going to go back to verse 20. He says, let me say this. It says, yeah, sorry about this. I lost my train of thought where I wanted to take this. Standing before me was one who married like a man. I heard the voice of a man between the banks of the lake call. It said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the mare. So Gabriel has been given a command to make Daniel understand the mare vision. Now he reassures him in verse 17. He says, basically, the kadzon pertains to the time of the end. My instruction now is to give you an explanation of the mare. Now notice verses 20 to 25. This seems counterintuitive, and I'll explain this in a minute. Gabriel is true to the command that he was given to explain the mare, and verses 20 to 25 is explaining the mare. Now you might say, wait a second, look at verse 20. It starts off with the ram. How could that be the mare? It starts off with the ram. It's impossible. It cannot be the mare. It's got to be the kadzon. Hold on to that thought. I'll answer that. But it looks like it's just explaining the kadzon, because you have the Medo-Persia in verse 20, then you have Greece in verse 21, then you have 4 kingdoms. What's going on here? Notice this. Hold on to this thought. I'm going to tell you this. The answer is, this is the mare, what you're looking at right here, because of this reason. And watch this right here. And I'm going to come back and explain each of these verses to you. This is the reason. Because at the end of that, in verse 26, Gabriel says this, the vision, the mare of the evenings and mornings, which has been told is true, but keep the kadzon secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. What's happening here is the best way to interpret this verse is this, and I'll explain why I say this. The vision, the mare, which is part of the evenings and mornings, which has been told is true. The vision, do you see how it says mare? And then it says of the evenings and mornings. See, the mare is part of the evenings and mornings. Now, where do you have evenings and mornings? Well, what is that associated with back in verse 13? Or I'm sorry, verse 14. It's associated with the 2300 evenings and mornings. So what it's saying is that the mare of that man, that mighty man, which I'm going to explain to you as Jesus Christ in a second, that mare is part of the 2300 evenings and mornings. Now you might say, how can you come to that conclusion? That's a pretty bold statement you're making. How do you know that the vision is part of the evenings and mornings? The mare is. Because you already know the answer to this, and I'm not a grammarian, or I should say, I ain't a grammarian, but what's going on here is this is called the partitive genitive. And you already know what it is. That's the fancy technical name for it. But I'll just give you a couple of examples. Here's some examples of a partitive genitive. And these are just some various scriptures I just pull out to show you. The verses and the context aren't important, but what the phrase is important. Look at this last part. The youngest of his sons. The youngest of his sons. The youngest. Oh, that means the youngest is a part of a larger group of sons. It just happens to be the youngest of the sons. We don't know how many sons there are. We just know that this individual is the youngest of his sons. He's part of a greater whole. In Genesis 22, one of the mountains. This is Abraham, one of the mountains. Well, that's one of several mountains. We don't know how many mountains, but one is part of a greater whole of a mountain range. In Job 3:6, the days of the year. Well, days are part of the year. Exodus 12:22, first month of the year. Okay, that's the first month. We know it's the first month of the year. We also know that there's 12 months to a year. I've months of the year. See, what I'm pointing out is now it works with time as well, the genitive partitive. Even in Genesis, we have the cool of the day. Well, the cool is only part of the day. Which part of the day? Maybe it's the morning, maybe it's the evening. The heat of the day, another one. It's part of a greater whole. See, what's happening is here. This is the point. The vision of the evenings and mornings, the vision of which is part, the mare, is part of the entire evenings and mornings. All right? But keep the vision, keep the kadzon, keep the whole thing secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. This is why, so you have to say, well, why is the mare placed at the beginning of the kadzon? Because the text basically says it. It says, the ram which you saw, right, which with the two horns represent, is the kingdom of Media Persia. See, the mare is just the beginning of the larger kadzon. And now watch this. Let's walk through the mare real quick. Verse 20, Medo-Persia, no question about it. Verse 21, Greece, no question about it. Verse 22, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, Ptolemy, no question about that. Now notice verse 23. It says, in the latter period of their rule. Now, the latter period of their rule would mean that it has to be sometime. Well, we know the Greek Empire was roughly from 331 to 168 BC. All right, so we have to say in the latter period of their rule. So in the latter period of their rule, something must arise after the Greek Empire. Well, no guessing at it. We know Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, and Ptolemy are at this point right here, just right before I laid this out. I laid the Daniel 2 metal man image with the metals across here. I put cross, Western Roman Empire. So that means in the latter period of their rule, near 168 BC, a king arises. So this king arises, insolent and skilled in intrigue. This is just talking about Rome. And then in verse 24, it talks about his power will be mighty, but not by his own power. It's basically saying there are spiritual forces, demonic forces that are lords over these kingdoms. And he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and holy people.
Okay, hold on. I kind of want to just kind of stop before we go too far, because we're reading this and it says the shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent the four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, which refers back to that first king, although not in his power, which I would think would mean like none of his sons or children. And in
Correct.
the later period of their rule, talking about those four kingdoms that arise from that first king, it sounds like when the transgressors that will run their course, a king shall rise up. I can't read that word, but skilled in intrigue because it's kind of
Yeah.
going to be small. But to me, that still sounds like it's talking about that first king's kingdom, and in the later period of their rule. Like I don't like how exactly did you connect that to Rome? Because I mean, I
Well,
just see Greece and four kingdoms that came up, and the latter period of their rule. I don't know, because like the whole text is talking nothing about like it mentions Media, Persia, Greece, and it doesn't, and mentions these four kingdoms and nothing else.
right. It's a good question. So basically, I think you have to say, you look at, I'm looking at my Bible, the verse 23. Yeah, in the latter period of their rule. So we have to say latter period of whose rule? Well, naturally, it's a direct reference to verse 22, right? So in the latter period of their rule, this would have to be during the, if you will, the divided, Greek, empire of those four kingdoms. But it's the latter period of their rule. See, we're moving in succession from successive world powers. But the only king, if you will, that can arise after in the latter period of their rule is symbolically Rome. Now, I will say this: the reason why is because watch this. Let me go through the rest of these verses and just stay with me at a very high level,
Okay,
and we
all
we
right.
can we can double tap on some of these verses and get a little bit more detail. So, for example, Rome arises naturally after Greece and the four kingdoms, the clasp. But it says in verse 24, his power will be mighty, but not by his own power. He will destroy to an extraordinary degree, prosper and perform his will. He'll destroy mighty men and holy people. Now, I believe that when we get to that verse, we're really talking about Pompey and his brutal suppression. And Josephus even records this, and where 12,000 Jews were killed. And notice this, though. Do you see how it says, I'm going back a little bit. A king will arise insolent and skilled in intrigue. Essentially, that is fierce of face. I don't have the Hebrew in front of me, but I think that's Azpanin. But basically, I believe it's a direct reference to Deuteronomy 28:50. And I'm just going to flip back there real quick. I don't think I have this on the screen, but Deuteronomy 28:50 is basically talking about Rome because of the Jewish people's disobedience. See, what happens is the Jewish people actually transgress because as I'm looking up Deuteronomy, I'll just explain this. In 161 BC, right about the time, right? And I should say this. Let me go back here. This timeline will help. You can't see this right here, but that number right here is 168 BC. That's the transition from Greece to Rome, the Battle of Pydna. But in 161 BC, just shortly before that, Judas Maccabeus basically forges a peace treaty with Rome because they have abandoned the God as their Lord God protector. They would rather put their trust in these pagan nations to hedge against the Hellenistic, overrun and influence that was occurring at that time. So they make a treaty with Rome. So they abandon the Lord God as their protector, which is basically saying, no, we think that we're better off with the protection of Rome. That's why it says, when the transgressors have run their course in verse 23, that's talking about the Jews. And Rome arises in verse 23. And back to insolent and skilled in intrigue. I'm going to go to Deuteronomy 28 real quick. But Deuteronomy 28 really talks about Rome If you look at verse 50, pick it up in verse 50. It says, or 49, Deuteronomy 28:49. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar. I believe this is talking about Rome. From the end of the earth as the eagle swoops down. Again, Rome symbolically had eagles. A nation whose language you shall not understand. A nation of fierce countenance. See that fierce countenance right there? That's basically Daniel 8:23, Panim, who will have no respect for the old, show no favor to the young. Moreover, it shall eat the offspring of your herd and the produce of your ground until you are destroyed, who also leaves you no grain, new wine, oil, nor increase of your, until they have caused you to perish. Look at verse 52. It shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout your land. Again, that's the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome. Verse 53, then you shall eat the offspring of your own body, the flesh of your sons and daughters, and whom the Lord your God has given you during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you. That's basically Titus in 70 AD. That's exactly what happened. So that prediction is already there. But I just wanted to point out in verse 50 of Deuteronomy 28, a nation of fierce countenance. That's the same thing, insolent, there in Daniel 8:23. But here's the main thing I want you to see at the high level. In verse 24, he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and perform his will is prosperous. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. This is Rome's basically horizontal conquest. It grew exceedingly great toward the beautiful land, the south, the east, toward the beautiful land. Now notice in verse 25, and through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence. He'll magnify himself in his heart. He will destroy many while they are at ease. Okay, that ease is basically shalva in Greek, and that's talking about the Pax Romana. But notice what it says here. It says, he will even oppose the Prince of Princes, but he will be broken without human agency. Now, he will even oppose the Prince of Princes. This is talking about Christ. Now, the next verse can go both ways, but he will be broken without human agency, meaning, but Christ will be broken without human agency in the sense that he'll lay down his own life. It could also mean Rome will be broken. I think this is where we're seeing a dual application. I think the Bible can go both ways in some cases and both be accurate and correct. But I just want to point this out. He explains the mare, which is about Christ, because this is the death of Christ right here in verse 25, opposing the Prince of Princes. But notice there's nothing about the 2300 in this mare explanation. And I want to show you something here. There's nothing about, let me scroll down. This is the mare, verses 20 to 25. And here's the point. In Daniel 8, verse 10 to 14, it's talking, this is the Kod zone, and it's about the daily, where the hosts were trampled, the regular sacrifice was removed, the sanctuary was thrown down, the host given over to the horn, the regular sacrifice given to the horn, truth is thrown to the ground, host and holy place trampled, 2,300 evenings and mornings, holy place restored. All of these elements in the Kod zone about the daily are nowhere to be found in the mare. That's why this whole idea of the mare is part of the evenings and mornings. What it's saying is the ram, the goat, the little horn, and the horizontal conquest of it, plus the prince is broken, talking about Christ, that's part of the larger Had zone. Because the larger Had zone about the daily, you have the little horn going vertical, you have stars falling, being trampled, you have equal to the commander of the host, you have removal of the daily, and then how long until the holy place and the host are trampled. That's why when Daniel sees this mare, he says, I'm exhausted and sick for days. And I was astounded at the vision. And here's the point. And this is where I want to answer your question, because this is the heart of your question. I was astounded at the mare. He was astounded at the mare, for there was none to explain it. He actually saw two back-to-back horror pictures, if you will, my words. He sees the death of the Messiah. He sees the death of the Prince of Princes in verse 25. And he also sees an attack on God's people for a long period of time. And God's truth are thrown to the ground and equal to the commander of the host. Now, this is why this is important. In Daniel 8, instead of laying out the Mare and Hadzon like this, I'm just going to use these curved lines. Because all we know in Daniel 8 is that there's the Mare is part of the evenings and mornings. And we know that the Mare and the Hadzon start at the same point. The Mare ends earlier because it's part of. We don't know how long it is yet. But the Hadzon goes further along. And it goes for 2,300 evenings and mornings. That's all we can say about Daniel 8 in this chapter. We don't know when it starts. We don't know when they both start because they both start at the same time. We don't know when the Mare ends. And we don't know when the Hadzon ends because we don't have a start point. All we know is it's 2,300 evenings and mornings. Here's the key. Go to Daniel 9, verse 24. I should say verse 23. And let me see if I can. Yeah, so basically this summary is this. Because here's the other thing, Chris, I want to point this out. Prophecy must point us to Christ. If you think about it, the Bible is about the God-man, Jesus Christ. So when we study the prophecies, we should be getting greater insight into Christ Jesus himself. And we should, when we study the prophecies, gain a greater light on the gospel itself, because the gospel is the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So when we study prophecies, if we start to, and we're historicists just like you, when we start to refocus in on like Antiochus Epiphanes and say, oh, look, this is what was happening in this Antiochus Epiphanes, it just doesn't fit, because we should be finding Christ, not some, minor king in the Seleucid Empire. Gabriel is coming to Christ. Gabriel is coming to Daniel to explain the Mare to him. Now, we know Gabriel appeared to Zechariah, announcing John the Baptist, who would announce the Christ. But we also know that Gabriel came to Mary and said, you're going to have a son. You're going to name him Jesus. Why would Gabriel come to Daniel to explain some minor king in the Seleucid Empire? Doesn't make any sense. He should be talking about Christ, which we believe he is talking about Christ here in the Mare. So now, and I just want to point that out. So notice this, and this will get to the heart of your question. I'm going to I've got to pull up Daniel 9, but I could probably stop sharing, and I think you could probably just follow along with the text of the Bible. Look at verse 23 of Daniel 9. Verse 23 of Daniel 9. Okay. At the beginning of your supplication, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. Now, that word vision is Mare. Okay? Now, remember, Daniel, back in verse 27 of Daniel 8, he doesn't understand the Mare. He was astounded at the Mare, and there was none to explain it. Now, Gabriel comes back roughly 9 years later. I don't have a specific date. I want to say it's like spring of 538 BC. He comes back to him, and he says, now in verse 23 of chapter 9, he says, I've come to tell you, you're highly esteemed. Give heed to the message, gain understand of the Mare. Now look at the very next words after that word vision in verse 23. What are the next words right out of in verse 24. 70 weeks. 70 weeks. Now it's saying, now we know the Mare is 70 weeks. 70 weeks have been decreed. That word, I think another colleague of mine said that was cut off. It's chitak. It's tak. It's the only word used in this context in Daniel. It means to cut, dissect, to sever,
or set aside.
Yeah, so
right.
70 weeks have been
Right.
set aside, but you're getting the length of the Mare now in this verse right here. It says 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. And it also says to seal up vision. That word vision right there is kadzon. You see, the Mare has to run its course. Those 70 weeks have to run its course. The Messiah has to fulfill his mission, finish the transgression, make an end of sin, atonement for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness. Greatest prophecy in all of the Bible right here, Daniel 9:24. What Christ did for us. And so, and to seal up kadzon, meaning the Mare has to run its course. Once it runs its course, kadzon is sealed up for the time of the end. That's why this 2,300 days, I guess I'm going to have to pull up another slide. Hold on one second.
Yeah, because see, when I'm reading this in verse 23, it says, consider the vision. I'm thinking the vision he's about ready to give him about the 70 weeks.
Yeah.
Because he was praying, and that's what he was praying about. He wasn't really praying about that first vision. He was kind of praying about all those people being in captivity, their sins, all that other stuff. And I guess like he knows that 70 years is almost up, that 70 years of captivity, and he's praying about all that. And I'm just thinking, to me, it's just like, oh yeah, here's 70 weeks, they're set aside, I mean, I don't know how else you would say 70 weeks are set aside or decreed. I wouldn't take that to mean cut out of anything. Because I don't know how else you would say like I'm giving you 70 weeks. I mean, you could say it like that, I guess, but I don't know how many other ways you can say I'm giving you 70 weeks, or 70 weeks are set aside to get this done, and that's it.
Yeah. So great question. So this is, I'm just going to pull up my screen up. Can you see this? I've got Daniel 9:24 on the screen.
Oops, yeah, let me share it. I forgot. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay.
So yeah, it's on the screen.
You can see it now. Okay.
Yeah,
So basically for 9:24, 70 weeks have been decreed, chatak, okay, cut off, determined, decide for your people in your holy city. Now remember though, the reason why we established back in Daniel 8:26, it says the vision of the evenings and mornings, the Mare of the 2,300 evenings and mornings, which has been told is true. See, Gabriel did explain the Mare to Daniel in Daniel 8. Daniel didn't understand it. That's why he's coming back to explain it right now in verse 24. He's now we're getting more details about what is this Mare all about? Because we didn't know how long the Mare was in Daniel 8. We do now. We now know that it's 70 weeks and it's cut off. And that's where the association between the 70 weeks and the 2,300 evening mornings is established right there. That's the answer right there, because of the genitive partitive in verse 26 of Daniel 8, the vision, which is part of the evenings and mornings, the Mare, the vision of the mighty man, the vision of Jesus Christ is part of the larger 2,300 evenings and mornings, which is for the time of the end. And so when we move to Daniel 9:24, Gabriel's now going to expound Daniel 9:24, 25 through 6, 27, 28. And that is the 27, just 27. And so notice this. Here's what's interesting about this. That's the same pattern that God gave basically there's two 490-year time prophecies, periods, I should say, not prophecies. But there's 70 years of captivity, I'm putting in right here, is basically the Babylonian captivity. And the 70 years of captivity was because the land had to rest. They weren't observing that 1 in 7 year rest, that they should have rested the land and just not, harvested, not harvested, but not, plowed and planted and everything. They should have just reaped the fruit. God said he would even cause an abundant years to happen in years 2 and 3. But they didn't let the land rest. So when you backtrack, you say, well, if God said 70 years for the land to rest in 2 Chronicles, that means that you have to take that all the way back 490 years. So this is God sending his messengers time and time again to walk in obedience, and they don't.
Hey, John.
Yep.
Hey, this is Soul Scripture. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Just got done working, and I thought I'd join in for a little bit. Hey, did you happen to explain, because I missed the first 45 minutes. Did you happen to explain verses 13 and 14 in Daniel chapter 8? Did you walk through those?
I only provided a high level overview. Basically, I was trying to explain to Chris and others about the distinction of the two visions in Daniel 8, that there's a Had zone and there's a Mare, and that verse 13, it says, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice? I just mentioned that that's the Kad zone. How long will the Kad zone about the regular sacrifice, or really more accurately, about the daily Hatamid?
Just to kind of help catch you up. So basically, my question was just about the 2300 and how can that possibly, because we went over the time frame of the large horn, the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, then the 4 kingdoms, and I was like, how can the little horn, how can the 2300 possibly start in 457 BC? When Alexander the Great dies in 323 BC. So, and that's kind of the question he's basically answering.
Yeah. And I guess I'm getting really get to the heart of the answer, and that is this. We have this. Now we know in Daniel 9:24, we know if you accept the premise of our explanation of the Mare is part of the larger Kad zone vision, and the Mare explanation starts with the ram, then the Kad zone and the Mare have to start at the same point in time. That's the critical question, because when the Mare, now we know that the Mare is 490 years. We know that the 2300 years is the Kad zone. The Mare is pointing to Christ. It's the death of the Prince of Princes in 825. But both visions have the same starting point, because the Mare is part of the larger 2300. And when we go to say, well, okay, when does the Mare begin? Well, now I do a very detailed study on this in the video, but I'm just going to give you the short answer. It says, for the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, so that you know that the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem on verse 25 of Daniel 9. The decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there'll be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So I walk through that and say, okay, here's 7 weeks. I walk through the prophetic days right here. And then I basically say in Daniel 9:24-27, you have 70 weeks. Again, explain the Mare. And it's broken down into 7 weeks and 62 weeks and 1 week. Because if you take 7 weeks plus 62 weeks, you get 69 weeks. Plus this 1 week is 70 weeks. So all 70 weeks are represented there. And what I do is, from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, we're talking about, I'll just see if I can pull up the specific verse. But yeah, it goes all the way back to Ezra 7, 457 BC. That's why That's why the 2300 evenings and mornings has to begin at 457 BC, because the Mare starts in 457 BC. And it is part of, right? It's part of the beginning part of the larger 2300 evenings and mornings. But remember, go ahead.
So a question for you then, following that, if I may.
Yeah.
You said the 2300. Does that have to do with the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, the giving over the sanctuary, and the host to be trampled underfoot? Is that all of the 2300?
No. See, and this is a great question. Go back to verses 13 and 14. It says, how long will the cod zone about the regular sacrifice apply? Now, I don't know if you heard when I explained 10, 11, and 12, but basically this is an attack on the church, subverting the ministry of Jesus Christ, taking the church captive during the Middle Ages, and lifting up and throwing down, if you will. I didn't explain all that about the daily. And it says, how long, verse 13, how long will the cod zone about the regular sacrifice apply? Because see, that regular sacrifice, that's something, again, it's the hatamid, it's the daily. That's something that the commander of the host possesses. Because it removed, I'm moving back up to verse 11. It says, it removed the daily from him, the regular sacrifice from him, the commander of the host. And the place of his sanctuary is thrown down. So I just am underscoring this. How long will the cod zone about the regular sacrifice apply while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? Now, here's the key. Notice this, though. Verse 14, it just says, he said to me, for 2300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. It's not saying that the transgression that causes horror is 2300 evenings and mornings. It's just saying that for 2300 evenings and mornings, then at the end of the 2300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored.
Right. So it seems like it's saying both, not one or the other. So I'll explain real quick. So in 13, it says, for how long, like you said, is the kazon. And this kazon here concerns specifically the regular burnt offering, the transgression, and all this stuff mentioned here.
Yes.
And the answer in verse 14 comes directly to that question, for how long? For 2300 evenings and mornings. So that 2300 evenings and mornings is a direct answer to that question, for how long? But then it also says that at the end of it, the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state or cleansed. So I'm not seeing where or how we can say that the 2300 is only about the ending and not about the content inside of it as well.
Great question. So I would say this. I may have misphrased it a little bit, speaking a little bit too quickly. Yeah, it's saying that the length of the cod zone is 2300 evenings and mornings, because the cod zone, if you go back to Daniel 8:1, it begins with the cod zone. Those first two verses, it says, vision, vision, vision in those first two verses. Those words in the Hebrew are kod zone, kod zone, kod zone. So yes, to your point, for how long, how long will the vision, how long will the cod zone be? And it specifically about the regular sacrifice, but yeah, for 2300 evenings and mornings. So we know the cod zone is 2300 evenings and mornings, but it's not necessarily saying that the transgression that causes horror, the daily removal, it's not saying that is 2300 evenings and mornings. It's saying the cod zone is 2300 evenings and mornings, but that the holy place will be restored at the end.
Right. So to kind of push back on that a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I definitely, in verse 2, it says kazon 3 times because he's given the vision, right? And so he's having this visionary experience. But here in verse 13, it says the kazon, and notice the word concerning. So this question here is, even though it's using the same word kazon, it's still concerning specifically the activity of the little horn, which is the regular burnt offering, transgression, and all of that. And so the next verse is an answer to that. So I'm still not seeing why here, when the question and the answer are given in verse 13 and 14, why we then say that it's actually applied to the when it first says the word kazon,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think I have to go back to this pattern, and I don't have it on this slide. Hold on, let me pull up a different. If I pull up a different slide, if I switch to a different
Yeah,
slide,
I can just hit the present button if you switch to something different.
like, do you see a bread on the screen right now?
No, I just
No, I've got to
chose the
switch.
Moray
Okay,
version.
let me switch to answer that question. I'm going to switch slides to this right here.
And then you just probably hit present or whatever it is that you gotta hit.
Yeah, let
And
me
by the
go.
way, Sola, when you're talking, if you want to like share your screen and then I can just click your screen where you're talking, because I saw Stephanie ask about putting scripture up on the screen while you were talking.
Okay.
And it would be easier for people to follow along.
Okay.
So that way I'll just switch back between you guys when you're talking, because I kind of would rather have both of you kind of like dominate the conversation over me, because Sola Scriptura is a former third generation Seventh-day Adventist. He kind of follows this whole Kazon and Moray thing a lot better than I can, and he understands my argument.
Okay.
So that way, and then I feel like I can just kind of rewatch this later and listen to you guys, because I think it's gonna take me a second listen to catch everything.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, well then, if you're already familiar with this, then I guess let me see if I can jump to this larger picture here of what's going on. So, I'll pull this up here. You're familiar with the Daniel 2 prophecy of successive world kingdoms, followed by Christ, followed by God's eternal kingdom. That's the pattern in Daniel 2. It's repeated in Daniel 7. Different details. We get more details about that little horn in Daniel 7. But in Daniel 8, again, we get a different representation of that. And so what you have is, what's happening here is, again, prophecy needs to point us to Christ. And so the 2300 evenings and mornings, the holy place is properly stored. This is pointing to Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. Just as in Daniel 7, it was the Ancient of Days took his seat, court sat, books were open. Just as the stone strikes the image, this is all pointing to Christ, and that's the larger pattern that I would say that we can't lose sight of. So it's not that, and I don't know if I'm going to answer your question, but I'd like to interact with you a little bit more on it. But it's not as if it's okay for I should say the 2300 evenings and mornings provides the framework for the rest of the book of Daniel. Now, I don't have this on the screen, but I'm just going to interact with that. For example, Daniel doesn't understand the Mare at the end of Daniel chapter 8. I guess I could, I don't know, I could stop sharing, and I'll just do this. Daniel doesn't understand the vision, the Mare at the end of chapter 8, which is Daniel 8:27. But then Gabriel comes back in Daniel 9 in verse 24 and then says, okay, or verse 23, I'm going to give you an understanding of the Mare. That last word there, verse 23, consider the Mare. The very next word, 70 weeks. He explains that to him. Now go to chapter 10. Watch this. I'm going to show you how this works for Daniel 10 and 11. In Daniel 10, notice in verse 1 that Daniel now understands the vision, and that word is Mare. In verse 1, he understood the thing and had an understanding of the Mare. Now, that's important because now in chapter 10, Gabriel comes back and he says to him, I'm going to now explain to you the Kazon. Now, look at verse Daniel 10, verse 12. Then he said to me, do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Verse 11. He said to me, O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words that I'm about to tell you. I just want to key in on that. Gabriel is now coming back, and he's basically saying, I want you to understand these words, and I'm about to tell you. Now look at verse 14. It says, now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision, that word vision is kadzon. For the vision pertains to the days yet future. And then he in verse 21 basically reaffirms he's going to tell him something. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Right, so we have three instances in Daniel 10 where he's going to explain the words to Daniel. He's going to explain the vision, the latter days, and he's going to give him the writing of truth. Now, basically, he's saying, my words, I've explained the Mare to you in Daniel 9:24-27. He comes back in Daniel 10 and he says, now I'm going to explain the kadzon to you. Now, notice the first words out of Gabriel's mouth in chapter 11. It says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be encouragement for him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to rise in Persia. Now, when you look at that, you're saying, okay, well, that's the beginning of the Mare. That's the beginning of the kadzon. That is the ram. That's Medo-Persia right there in verses 1 and 2. So he's explaining the Mare. Now, what I want to show you is this. And hopefully this will answer your question. I'm going to pull up another file. And I need to show you guys two more things. And this, hopefully this makes sense. If it doesn't, then we can interact. But bear with me. Let me just open up a different file. Should have had this open before. Okay. One second.
While we wait, how much time do you got? If you don't mind me asking.
To keep going. I mean, I can go. Another. It's if you guys want to end it.
Oh, I go a while, so it doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
It's kind of like how much time everybody else has. Because for me, I'm used to staying up at night because I work nights.
Okay, let me do this. Let me just, I'll see if everybody's good for 15 more minutes. I think I can try to make a couple more points. Now, I should say this. I go through this very slowly on the website and the videos and go through every verse and explain everything. I'm just trying to cram it all in and it's difficult to walk through that very quickly.
I did put your YouTube channel in the channel description. If anyone's watching and wants to hear more from them, it's all in the YouTube description.
They're really well put together videos as well too. I must say. Really
thank you.
Oh yeah, I will say, man. Even though I disagree with it, I'm like they probably are the better ones I've seen.
Yeah.
Thank you. So here's the I can now present this. Let me share this screen and it should come up.
Even this presentation's better than I think anything else I've ever seen of Seventh-day Adventists explaining this.
Yeah, we just felt like there wasn't a clear, thorough explanation. And I know people will still disagree. They can still disagree, but we wanted to give you our best explanation possible. That's why we put these videos together. Can you see that screen with numbers 1 through 45 on it?
Yes.
Okay.
a little small, but yeah,
Yeah.
you can see it.
It's not the main point, but I just want to say this is basically Daniel 11. At Daniel 11, I've just put verses 1 through 45 there. And, basically, I'm just going to give you the framework for it. In the first 4 verses, you've got Darius, Cyrus, Cambyses, Smyrtus, all these things, Alexander the Great, and Cassander, Lysimachus, Suetonius. That's all in the first 4 verses. But again, Gabriel has come back to explain the Cod Zone to Daniel in chapter 10. Now we know that the Cod Zone is for the time of the end. Remember, if you agree with our premise on the genitive partitive, the Mare is part of the evening and mornings, then the Mare and the Cod Zone have to have the same starting point, the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, which is 457 BC. So that's roughly somewhere in verses 2 and 3. This is just rough, okay? Now, if you go to, I've extended the Cod Zone all the way down to verse 40. Now, it doesn't say 1844 in verse 40, but it does say, if you look at verse 40, it does say at the end time. All right, that's why I've put the end of the Cod Zone at the end time, and I just put time of the end, Daniel 8:17, because that's what Gabriel says. Son of man, understand that the Cod Zone pertains to the time of the end. All right. Now, we know the Mare is part of the evenings and mornings, and in all, I'm just going to skip to this again. Mare is part of the evenings and mornings. So when we go through the framework for Daniel 11, we should see the Mare appear. And we essentially do, because, and I'm just going to skip to this, because when you get to verse 21, now I should point this out. This is very interesting. This is a deeper structural pattern study that we haven't, I don't think I mentioned it, but there's much deeper that we can go with chiastic patterns. But if you say, how many verses are in Daniel 11? You'd say 45. And I would say, mathematically, what's the center of that? What's the center?
22 and a half.
Yeah, 22 and a half. Well, if you look at verse 22 and a half, you will see that it says Prince of the Covenant. Christ is right at the center of Daniel 11. And there's more that I can say about these chiastic structures and how they break down, but it's, and I don't have time to go into it. I don't want to get distracted, but the fact that he's at the center is just underscoring that we're on the right track regarding the Mare and the Cod Zone, because again, this is pointing to Christ. Because this, what we would assert, and I'm going to basically show you a larger pattern here, is this, and right here is this. You have, no, you know what? I don't want to show you guys this. I want to get to the heart of our main point of the entire SDA belief, and you'll bear with me. Give me 2 seconds to open up another slide package.
Sure, no problem.
This will drive it home, and you can still disagree, but let me pull this up. Let's see. It is
But
right.
who did you learn that one part you just showed us from? I'm just curious, where you showed us it was on verse 22 and a half or whatever.
Oh, that's my colleague and partner in Angels in the Glen, Pastor Michael Oxentango. Okay. He has, and I can bring him in. He probably can take it to a whole nother level than I can. I've been studying with him for the past decade, and he knows Hebrew, Greek. He knows history. He's an extraordinary individual. If you'd like, I can bring him in, and he said he'd be willing to participate and close any gaps that I haven't addressed. But
Yeah, that would be awesome sometime. I probably need to take a break from doing so many Seventh-day shows about Seventh-day Adventism. But yeah, maybe in a couple of weeks or something do that.
yeah, absolutely. So here's what I want to point out, and maybe we can interact with this. This is, I explained this slowly, but I'm just going to put everything up on the screen. So tell me when you can see this.
Yeah, just whenever you're ready, I'll add it up.
Okay. I'm so used to Zoom and I'm just going from screen to screen. Okay. Tell me if you can see that.
I got it. There we go.
This is basically the largest. I wanted to put this together so everyone could really understand what's going on here. And let me walk you through it. And it's, again, it goes back to the pattern that is already established in Daniel 1:1 in terms of literal Israel and spiritual Israel, the church. But I'm going to start with Judah taken captive. So in 605, the summer of 605 BC, Daniel and his friends are taken captive. You have the second attack, 597, Ezekiel 10,000, 586, temples destroyed. All right, but 605 begins the 70-year captivity in Babylon. 535 marks the point at which Cyrus decrees, Ezra 1:1, the Lord's commissioned me to build him a temple, and that's the rebuilding of the temple, all right, in 535 BC. But it's not until Daniel 9:25, the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, that's 457 BC. That's the restoration of Jerusalem at that decree, 457 BC. What's important to know is this. Again, the Mare, which is part of the evenings and mornings, that's the key right there. The Mare would point to the first coming of Christ. And I haven't had a chance to go through all of it, but 7 weeks and 62 weeks until Messiah the Prince. And I can go through all those details on the website, but that's the first coming of Christ. But notice this, though. I've just included these 3 dates here. Basically, 312 is the Edict of Milan. Basically, be benevolent to Christians, Constantine. 380 AD, Roman Church, or Roman Empire adopts Christianity as the official state religion. 429, Theodosian Law Code, basically merges church and state. By 538, though, you've got basically the emergence of the church-state system. That's where we interpret the times, and half a time, the church-state system of the Middle Ages. But at that point in time, what's happened is the same pattern that literal Israel was taken captive. Now the church is taken captive, and the law, the gospel truths, the ministry of Christ, everything is overturned and obscured, and doctrines of men replaced the commandments of God and the doctrines of God. And so that happens for a time, times, and half a time. But notice this. We believe it starts in 538 AD, ends in 1798 AD. And I should point out this. France stands it up. France brings it down in the French Revolution. I have more to say that on our Daniel 11, 40 to 45, and even our Revelation videos. It's some very compelling material. But notice this. From the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, it applies to both the 457 and the 1844. Because again, prophecy must point us to Christ. And so this sets off the chain reaction to the first coming of Christ. This will set off a chain reaction because Christ now, he says, then the holy place will be properly restored. The holy place is no longer a physical temple in ancient Jerusalem. This is talking about the heavenly Jerusalem and God's church on earth, which is his temple, right? Do you not know that you're a temple of the Holy Ghost who dwells within you? You're not your own. And I can go through many other scriptures in Ephesians, Colossians, talking about we are God's building, we are God's church, we are stones built upon one another, we are God's household. Many scriptures to demonstrate that the holy place is God's church. The restoration begins. Why is that? Why does a restoration need to begin in 1844? Well, because the church had been devastated during the Middle Ages. I mean, you go back to the Reformation of Luther, right 15, 17 right here. I mean, righteousness by faith starts to emerge towards the end of this period. And boy, oh boy, that was controversial, as we know, the wars that ensued thereafter. But the church state system comes crashing down. And now, and I explain all this, there has to be prophetic movements in terms of what's going on at the end of these time periods. And I explain that more in the Revelation videos. But that's essentially the heart of it. We have to understand that this is now setting off a chain reaction. Christ Jesus now enters his most holy place ministry. And we prove that through scripture in the Daniel 9 part 5 video. But he enters the most holy place because basically judgment is occurring in heaven. The court sat and the books are open. And that is the loud cry, if you will, the calling out to say Christ is coming again very soon. Because you see the pattern here? Captivity takes place 70 years. The restoration of Jerusalem begins, and it results in the first coming of Christ. Same thing happens with the church. Church is taken captive for a time times half. That's a factor of 18 greater than 70. And as soon as that ends, we have the 2300 Evenings and Mornings saying the holy place is being restored. Christ moves from his holy place ministry to his most holy place ministry.
Okay, I just got a question because
yeah, go ahead.
It kind of sound like when you're explaining that, like sort of like the Seventh-day Adventist church is hinted at being like the ones that are doing this restoration. So it's the restoration of God's church through the Seventh-day Adventists. Now that's just what it came across. I'm not saying that's what you were saying. That's why I'm stopping to ask.
No, yeah, it's a great point. And no, the Seventh Day, I can point out scriptures that are, and I explain this in the Revelation 10 and 11 videos. But basically, God is calling his people out of Babylon. And it's important to note, look at Revelation 18, verse 4. Now, this is the very final cry that the voice from heaven gives in terms of, it says, come out of her, my people. Come out of Babylon. See, I'll say this, there are many millions of sincere Christians who are saved, I believe this, who are saved and are in Babylon, spiritual confusion. Babel means confusion. Because the church state of the Middle Ages obscured the text of the Bible. To have a Bible was a huge thing, but to be able to read it and understand it. So many truths have been obscured. And what God is basically pointing out through this prophetic movement is that he's preparing his people for his second coming. We basically preach and teach the three angels message, which is don't take the mark of the beast. Severest warning in the Bible. No, by far, there's no more severe warning than the mark of the beast. And we believe that it's the last event that must take place on the earth because Satan wants full control. He wants to suppress the truth of God. He wants to suppress the commandments of God. He doesn't want, he's jealous and envious of anyone who's going to obtain heavenly Canaan because we're taking his place. This is what's happening. But God is bringing attention to his church. Some people, we can go into more detail about, people say, oh, this is the bitter disappointment of 1844. They say, it can't be true. Well, let's go back and look at Christ. When Christ was crucified, did the disciples or anybody have any clue what was happening? They had no idea. Even after he resurrected, they said to him in Acts 1, is it now at this time that you're going to restore the kingdom? He goes, no, it's not for you to know the times or epochs, but you're going to receive power not many days from now. And it's when the Holy Spirit fell upon them at the day of Pentecost in Acts 2, then they realized, this is why Christ had to die, for the remission of sins. And so the church, God's people, even back here, they missed, I should say, the nation of Israel, largely, the nation of Israel, missed the first coming of Christ. I would say we need to pay careful attention to those lessons because we're in a similar jeopardy of missing the signs of the times for the second coming of the Messiah. That's why we believe the explanation of the Mari and the Hadzon is the answer we need for end times to understand where we are in prophetic history and what Christ is doing in the heavenly sanctuary.
So, to get back to Daniel 8, 13, and 14, I'm not quite sure if you answered my question on that. You may have, if you
Okay.
could just repeat your answer. I have a short attention span, so I do apologize for
Sorry. Yep.
that. It's my fail.
No, go ahead. Can you
Oh, yeah.
restate your question one more time? Sorry.
Yeah. So the verse 13 has the
Here,
question.
why don't we bring that up on the screen? Do you want me to bring your screen up, or I can bring my screen up? Because I think it would help the audience if.
Good catch.
Yep.
Yes.
I'll
Yeah,
stop.
if you want to share your screen, so and then I'll add it. Okay, there we go. This will help everyone.
Okay, so in verse 13 here, it has for how long? So that's the question. And then the question is about the kazon, and this kazon here is specifically concerning the activity of the little horn mentioned here in all of this right here.
Mm-hmm.
And it says here the answer to this question for how long is 2300 evenings and mornings.
Yeah.
And so this activity of the little horn is 2300 evenings and mornings, regardless if we say half a day, full day, day for a year, whatever it is specifically focused on the transgression and the activity of the little horn.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not seeing where or how we come to the conclusion based off of this that the 2300 starts with the ram, but the little horn activity, that's what this question is about, doesn't start until looks like you'd say in Rome's time.
Yeah. So the way I would answer that, it's a good question. I think we have to be careful to say that the 2300 evenings and mornings is the length of time concerning the regular burnt offering. All it says, remember, it says for 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. See, the key is the 2300 evenings and mornings is pointing to the restoration, not necessarily the length of the regular, the daily, the hatamid being removed.
Could it be both and not just one or?
Well, we know, again, when there's two ways to answer that. One logically, the other theologically. Logically, if the Kod zone begins in Daniel 8:1 with the ram, 457 BC, well, the regular sacrifice isn't even in play. Christ hasn't even come on the scene yet, nor has he even ascended to his heavenly ministry in the holy place. So I would say logically, it can't apply to 457 at that point in time. It has to apply at the appropriate time, which is later on, after you see the little horn grow horizontally. Remember, it grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and toward the beautiful land. Then it grew up. And it's at that point that the concerning the regular burnt offering is the key, because then that is now the vertical phase of the little horn. And that's when the attack really occurs, right then and there.
So what year does the attack occur?
Well, I mean,
the little horn.
We broadly, in our Daniel 7 study and writ large in all of our, doctrines will apply to it in 538 AD, when the church state system is solidified during the Middle Ages.
Okay, I guess I'm confused, because if it starts in 538 AD and the attack of the little horn, then it doesn't start in 457.
No, but the cod zone does. The cod zone it's inclusive of the ram and the goat. Remember, in Daniel 8:1, it says the cod zone, the cod zone, the cod zone, and it starts off with a ram and a goat. So when you look at the cod zone writ large, you just have to say the cod zone has to start with the ram.
Okay,
Well,
if the cod zone starts with the ram, but the 2300 doesn't have to start with the ram. I mean, what in the text says that the 2300 has to start with the ram?
Because it says and this is the key, the mare of the evenings and mornings, verse 26. If you go to Daniel 8, verse 26, the mare, which we know in Daniel 9:24 is the 70 weeks, it says the mare of the evenings and mornings. So it's saying that's 70 weeks, which is part of the larger cod zone, begins in 457 because it was the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And Gabriel says, was given the command to explain the mare to Daniel, and he begins his explanation in verse 20, and he starts off with the ram. So we know that the mare is the beginning of the cod zone, but it's only part of the cod zone. So we have to let the text allow us to say, okay, what's going on here is, and I know it sounds counterintuitive, but we've gone over this. I feel very confident this is the most accurate way to understand Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, is we have to understand the relationship between the Mara and the Hod zone.
Well, it almost seems like that is a presupposition that every time Mare and Kazon the word is used, it has to be referring to the same thing, or they have to be directly connected, and the starting points have to be the same starting points.
Well, okay. Yeah, I think you may have missed my earlier. Can I share a screen and maybe point
Yeah,
something?
I can share whatever screen you pull up.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me go back to this one right here. I want to go back to Daniel 8. Bear with me one second.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, let's go right here. And let's see. So basically, yeah, here's our main point for Sola Scriptura. The reason why we believe this way explanation works is because, again, there's two words for vision, and I should really go back a little further. I think you're familiar with when we say the Mari and the Hod zone.
Yeah.
And I'm highlighting in blue and red which words are Cod zone and Mari here, because in verse 15, Daniel, when he had seen the Cod zone, meaning when he had seen the ram, the goat, the little horn, both the horizontal and the vertical attack, he sought to understand it. Okay, naturally, he just saw all that. That the whole verse 1 through 14 is all about the Hod zone. Then behold, one standing before me was one who looked like a man. That word is mare. Now, I pointed out earlier that technically, Cod zone, mare and Cod zone mean the same thing: revelation, sight, vision, appearance, sight, vision. But Cod zone is something that's seen in the mind, like a dream or a vision, whereas mare is something that is actually seen with the eyes, like physically seen light entering the eyes. So he sees this vision of the ram, goat, little horn. Then all of a sudden, standing before him is one who marred like a man. And then Gabriel in verse 16 is told to give give Daniel an understanding of the mare. Now, Gabriel then reassures Daniel that he says, "Son of man, understand that the Cod zone pertains to the time of the end." And that's why when we get to here, Daniel 8:26, He does tell him about the mare in verses 20 to 25, but he says the vision, the mare, which is part of the evening and the morning, which has been told is true, keep the calzone secret. That's why the mare is part of the larger hot zone. Now I explained why we, it's the mare is part of a larger whole, and I pulled up some scripture verses to demonstrate, the genitive partitive, but it's basically the point though is that's how we know that the mare, because the mare is explained in verse 20. And
okay, I guess one thing I'm wondering, just to make sure I'm following this, is calzone or hazone used in any of the first 4 verses in Daniel 8?
Yes, it's used in the first 2 verses.
Okay, so that's why I would just go ahead and say the 2300 is not just the the calzone's not just the 2300, it's the whole entire vision of Daniel 8. So we can just start all the way back here. Yeah, so we can start all the way back to when this first started happening, and when they get I guess you would start all the way back to where Persia's getting Babylon's getting conquered by Persia. I think that's what happens in verse 3.
You mean Daniel 8?
Yeah. In verse 3. So
right.
and then we come and or maybe it's verse 4, and then it's and then in verse 5 you got the goat, which is Greece. So we start this all the way, so we can say this whole vision goes all the way back to 538, and then it's and then verse 23, it's just like whenever the daily gets interrupted, that's when the 2300 would start, is what I would think. That's what I'd be looking for. And when we jump to verse Daniel 9, if you want to say, oh, it's got cut out, I would say it's cut out it could be cut out of any part of this whole zone if you really want to go there. It doesn't have to be cut out of the 23. It can be cut out of anything going all the way back to 538 if you want. And just
that's a great point, Chris, but that's why we focus in on Daniel 8:26, because the mare is part of. That's how it can get cut off. That's why it's cut off in Daniel 9:24.
Okay, so it's the 2300 like a smaller like a mare of the other of this whole zone? Because I'm thinking it sounds to me like this whole chapter 8, since it starts off talking about a zone, I'm thinking everything from these first 4 verses on down is all zone.
And that's true. And all the way down to verse 14 is zone. Because
I think the Ka zone continues on after verse 14. I don't think it stops.
No, that's what I explained earlier. I don't know if you caught up with that, but that's where I explained that this is why this is the key. Watch this. I'll go over it again. When Daniel had seen the vision. Now this is a summary of all of 1 through 14. It started off with Ka zone. And it walked you through all of that. Okay? It walked you through all the way to the 2300. And then he says, when Daniel, had seen the Ka zone, I sought to understand it. But then all of a sudden, someone who married like a man is standing before Daniel. And Gabriel's told to give Daniel an understanding of the mare. Now, when he explains the mare, he begins the mare in verse 20. And that's why it's so important to recognize this, that the mare begins with the ram of Media Persia. You might say, wait a second, what's going on here? He just saw a man. He just saw a mighty man. Why is Gabriel going all the way back to the beginning of the Ka zone? Now, I explained 20 to 25 that the Prince of Princes, right here in 25, that's Christ. See, the mare is about this mighty man, and it's about Christ. It just happens to be the beginning of the Ka zone. That's why he explains the mare, but the mare ends with the death of Christ. You don't have, and that's why I put this in, the mare is about Christ, the Prince of Princes right here. all the Kadzon about the daily, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? Well, about the regular sacrifice is really the focus is verses 10 through 14. That's about the church being trampled, the removal of the daily. And we explain in the other videos, it's the law of God, the gospel of God, the new covenant, the ministry of Jesus Christ. Everything gets trampled and thrown down during the Middle Ages. And you don't see any elements of Daniel 10:14. This is why I put this up here on the screen visually, text-wise. If you look at the elements of Daniel 8:10 to 14 and what's going on here in terms of the removal of the regular sacrifice and the sanctuary thrown down and the host given over to the horn, you don't see any of these elements in the Mare. Because the Mare isn't about has nothing to do with the Kadzon. It has nothing to do with the daily and all of this that's going on.
It has but do you really need to explain 8 through 14? Because it seems like it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the language. You can pretty much figure out the stars are the people, and what the host is, the sanctuary, the daily, what the daily is. I mean, I don't know what else like Gabriel really needs to explain, but the goat and the ram, you definitely need to explain, because you're talking about a goat. What's this goat all about? And what's this ram with 2 horns? Like, I'd have trouble figuring that out by myself, so I need understanding for that, but I don't understand why we need understanding for the whole thing about the sacrifices in the daily.
Well, that I haven't had time to explain that fully, to go into what that means. And we basically, we can do it another time, or you guys can check out our Daniel 8. I've got 3 parts for Daniel 8 videos and 5 parts for Daniel 9. And I'll walk through every verse and phrase and bring out everything on this. I'm just trying to make sure you understand our core view is the key is 8:26, that the Mare is part. The Mare in Daniel 20 to 25 has nothing to do with the daily, that host being taken captive. It has everything to do with the ram and the goat, because he starts the ram and the goat. And that's why the Mare is part of the evenings and mornings. That's why the Mare begins with the ram and the goat. It's part of the larger Kadzon. That's our main point. Because when you, and I'm being repetitive now, I must not be communicating that well. I apologize. I might be getting late. But that's why when you get to, Daniel doesn't understand the Mare. He doesn't understand these verses right here at the end of Daniel 8. Gabriel says, Gabriel's given a command, explain the Mare. And he does. He keeps the integrity of that command intact. He does not explain the Kadzon to him. He explains the Mare. But it happens to be the beginning of the Kadzon. That's why in Daniel 8:26 or 8:27, it says, I was exhausted and sick for days. I got up and carried on the king's business. I was astounded at the Mare. And there was no one to explain it. See, he doesn't understand what Gabriel just told him. That's why in Daniel 9, Gabriel comes back to Daniel and visits him, and he says, I'm now, remember, I don't have it up here, but yeah, I probably do somewhere. But basically, yeah, I've now come back. Let me see if I can find it. You guys can probably pull it up. I've now come back to explain to you the Mare.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I can pull up the...
Yeah, right here. Right, I've got Daniel 9:23.
Oops. There.
It basically, so give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. That word vision, Mare. And then the very next words, 70 weeks have been cut off for your people. That's why Daniel 9:23 and Daniel 8:26, the vision, which is part of the evenings and mornings, the Mare, which is part of the larger 2300, which has been told is true, but keep the Kadzon secret because it pertains to many days in the future. And so that's how we understand the 2300. Both begin in 457 BC, because when Gabriel explains the Mare to Daniel, he says, from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, there'll be 7 weeks until Messiah the Prince. There'll be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. And that's where we fill in the 7 weeks, 62 weeks and walk through how the Messiah comes out at the other end of the Mare.
Okay, so
There's a lot
basically
here.
you're telling me
there's a lot here.
you're basically telling me like verse 26 of Daniel 8. Well, Daniel 8:26. You're saying that verse for vision is Mare, and then you're connecting it to Daniel 9:23 where it says vision, and that's Mare too, right?
That's correct.
Am I following that?
That's exactly right, because it's basically saying, and the vision, and so this is why I say, and the vision, which is part of the evenings and mornings. See, the Mare is part of a larger vision. And for Sola Scriptura, I pull this up. It's called the genitive partitive. Here's a sampling of some verses that talk about that, but it's just basically says something is part of a larger whole. The youngest of his sons. And I reviewed this with Chris and everybody, but it's just to say that, because when you look at this verse, if I take out, I purposely put in which is part of, just to emphasize this, and the vision of the evenings and mornings. It's saying the Mare of the evenings and mornings. The Mare is a mighty man. It's the man of evenings and mornings is 2300.
So you're saying the word Mare is the genitive?
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
And it is part of a greater whole. And that's why we graphically represent it like this.
Yeah.
Okay, so why wouldn't I just say that the Mare, if you want to go that direction, and you're saying the Mare and the 26, and now it's describing the greater whole, which is the 70 weeks, right? 490 years. And you could say that maybe this is either, 2,300 sacrifices done over six and a quarter years, or 1,150 days, and it fits inside the 70 weeks, because because you said Mare goes into like it fits into something else. So, but we see the 70 weeks. So if that was actually 2,300 days or 1,150 days, it could fit right inside the 70 weeks.
Well, let me ask you this. When you see the explanation, let's set aside Mare and Hadzon. When you look at Daniel 9:24, do you interpret 70 weeks as literal weeks or prophetic weeks?
Well, it actually says 77s. So,
right.
And we can take that to mean, many things, because it could be, because we know that sabbatical cycles are sevens.
Right.
Just like, a week is, a week, in of itself is it has to do with the Sabbath. So, whether it's like, so any cycle of 7, you could say it's weeks, or you could say it's sevens.
Okay. Well, here's the interesting thing about that is, if you take it as prophetic weeks, like a day for your principle, and it's 490 years, then isn't it curiously interesting that from the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, which is 457 BC, and you move forward the 7 weeks and 62 weeks, you come to 27 AD when Jesus is baptized in Luke.
I'm following that.
Yeah. Now I say that to say this: if the 70 weeks are a prophetic time period, day for your principle, and why would you then apply a literal application to the 2300 evenings and mornings when they're all surrounded by symbols of rams and goats and horns?
The reason why I would do it personally is because it says evening, mornings. It's the only place in the Bible that does that, and it's talking about nothing but sanctuary stuff. So I'm thinking, okay, sanctuaries in Numbers 28, it's got an evening and a morning sacrifice, and we know that's what the daily or the regular or the continual offering was. So I would just assume that's what it means, because this is the only spot where you don't see the word yom in Hebrew. All the other places where people do year for day principles and things, at least the word days exist in there, yom, but we don't see that in verse 8:14.
That's a great point. I think I would underscore what you said about it's pointing to sacrifice. It's pointing to, the idea of a ram and a goat are sacrificial animals. The whole ministry of Christ is about his sacrifice. And so, but here's another way to look at that, the 23rd evenings warnings. Like, for example, if you basically say it's literal, think about this in the broadest sense. If you look at the historical narratives of the Bible and you look at the time periods that are literal time periods, like, for example, I think of like God, the Lord says to Abraham, you're going to be enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. The iniquity of Israel in Ezekiel is 390 years. Before the flood, God says, I'm going to allow 120 years before I'm going to destroy the earth. You look at the Babylonian exile, 70 years. Okay. Even Joseph's 7 years of plenty and famine. Okay. You've got some long time periods, 400 years, 390 years, 120 years. If you take all of the prophetic material in Daniel and Revelation and interpret it as literal, you're shrinking everything. Everything has to fit within a 3.5 to 6.5-ish year time period. I don't know can you see my hands?
Yeah.
So you can.
Oh, here. Oh, let me put you back in the screen. Sorry.
Oh, no. I'm only looking at my own screen. Oh, now I see me. I should have been there. Okay, now I see. Yeah. So if you take all those literal narratives in the Bible, and take 400 years and 120 years and all these things, all of the prophetic time periods now shrink to a tiny minuscule. And then you have to say, is that the way we should interpret the time prophecies in Daniel and Revelation? Because now, in my words, I'm forced to be a preterist or a futurist. Because when you look at Daniel 7, you're looking at the length of over 1,000 years of successive world kingdoms from Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, divided Rome. Then you have that little horn for a time, times, and half a time, which talks about the little horn for half of the chapter. Almost the second half of the chapter of Daniel 7 is about that little horn, and it's persecuting God's people. If you're forcing it into a tiny little sliver of time across all of those successive world kingdoms, that's an imbalance. I would assert that that's imbalanced.
Well, I guess I would just say that you got this picture of what the little horn in chapter 8 that's persecuting the Jews, which was all a real event that happened during the period of Judas Maccabees. In fact, I think this is why Daniel fainted, because he saw, like, if I was a Jew and I got like a vision of the Holocaust or something, like God gave me that vision, it's a short time period. I see all this stuff. It's something very specific and it makes me feel faint. And I'm like, okay, what did I just see? So the same thing happened during that period when Antiochus did everything he did to the Jews from like I think it's like 168 to 165 or 167 to 164 BC. So, and then it's just like, I think the reason why God still uses that little horn again in Daniel 7 to represent Rome is, I think maybe there might be something similar happening with the papacy and God's church, and the Christian church. So that's why I think there might be like this, a little horn here and a little horn there. So
it's a good point, Chris. I mean, we affirm what you're saying. Yeah, it's certainly Antiochus Epiphanes did desecrate the literal sanctuary, set up a statue of Zeus, force the Jews to do certain. Yeah, totally agree for that. But we just don't see it fulfilling. We don't see that fulfilled in Daniel 8. And I'll tell you another reason why. Go to Daniel 11. And I explained this in our Daniel 11 video. Again, we're using the Mari Kadzon framework to understand Daniel 11, but look at verse 14 in Daniel 11.
all right, let me get down to it so everyone can see.
Okay.
Now I'm using the Geneva Bible if anyone's wondering. So
okay. Now this will still work, but Because notice in verse 14, it says, at that same time there shall many stand against the king of the south. Also the rebellious children of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. Now that word vision is kodzon. See, at the time of Judas Maccabeus, they basically rise up and try to fulfill they're interpreting, just like the Jews of Jesus' day, they're interpreting Daniel 8 literally. They think that what's happening in verses 10, 11, 12 is basically Antiochus Epiphanes. So that's why this verse in 14 is saying they're going to lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, meaning to cleanse the sanctuary, to restore it to its rightful order. And they did. And that's how they got Purim and the Festival of Lights and all those things that they still celebrate today. But this verse is saying they try to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. They don't fulfill the vision because it has nothing to do with the Antiochus Epiphanes work. But it has everything to do with what would happen to God's people during the Middle Ages, during the church day system. And it necessitates the restoration of the church at the end of the 2300, when Christ enters the most holy place. The other thing, and I don't have this on the screen, but or maybe can I pull up another
Sure.
to further emphasize this? Let me show this. Tell me. Oh wait, I've got to actually share. Okay. Oh, can you see this? Oh no, I've got to switch.
All right. Yeah, just let me know.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me. Do you see a Babylonian captivity and a medieval church day captivity?
No, that's not popping up yet.
Okay, I've got to pull up the other one. Hold on one second. Right. Let's see. Here we go. This is a little trickier than Zoom, but it takes a second. Okay. This is what I wanted to... now, can you see the comparison between Babylonian captivity and...
Yes.
Okay. Let me walk you through this. Basically, I want to compare the Babylonian captivity to the medieval church state captivity. In the autumn of 605 BC, this is when Nebuchadnezzar attacks Jerusalem and takes Daniel's friends captive. That marks the beginnings of the 70 years of captivity. I include the 597 attack and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 586. Fast forward, 539, October 12th, Babylon falls to Medo-Persia. But that's not when, there's still a few more years that have to transpire before Cyrus makes his decree that it's the 70th year and you can go back and start to rebuild the temple. Darius reaffirms that decree. The temple's rebuilt by 516. But 457 is the Artaxerxes' decree, his seventh year, to rebuild Jerusalem, establish magistrates and officials so that your people can obey. And that's 457. That sets off, that's the beginning of the Cod Zone, right? But the pattern is clear in terms of the medieval church state captivity. 508, and I go through this in more detail. I won't give you the full history of it, but Clovis, the first king of the Franks, embraces Catholic Christianity, basically sets up the church state system. 508. This is where we get the 1290, the 1335, the times and half a times, the little horn. But notice this, 1798 is when the church state system falls. And in our videos, we talk about 1831 and 1843, first angel's message, second angel's message. But 1844 is the holy place restored. Again, this is, we believe, is the heavenly Jerusalem. Christ moves to the most holy place ministry, and the church, truths that were obscured during the Middle Ages are restored to the church and brought to light. Now, I want to say this, the church is restored. Again, holy place is talking about God's people. And I can walk through all those scriptures in the New Testament that talk about God's being a temple, God's building, the construction of the church. Notice I just point out two numbers, 1798 and 1844. See those two numbers? Now, the difference is 46 years, right? If you take 1844 and you subtract 1798, there's 44 all the way back to 1800, and 2 more years would make 46 years. Notice, I just want to show you something. I'm going to flip. I don't have the scripture up here, but I'm just going to go to it. But if you go to John chapter 2, and go to verse, I usually know it when I see it, but go to verse 19, John chapter 2, verses 19. He says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And notice the Jew says, it took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days? In verse 21, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. And we know that, obviously. But do you notice the 46 years? 46 years to build this temple. Now, I find it curiously fascinating that the end of the church age system ends in 1798, and the holy place is restored in 1844, 46 years. See, what's happening is there's this transition period between 1798 and 1843, and God's people start coming out of captivity, if you will, from the spiritual Babylon. And what is happening is more and more people are coming to the light of the restoration of the truths that were obscured during the Middle Ages. That's where we stand as a denomination, to bring back deep Bible studies that exemplify, Christ at the center. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we're not. I hope no one thinks that no one's better than anybody else.
Yeah, I do have the Seventh-day Baptist in the back of my mind as all this is coming, because I'm like, well, they kept the Sabbath and we're getting persecuted. We ran out of Europe and had to flee to America.
Right.
So I'm just kind of like, but
Yeah.
God decides to like, we don't care that you kept the commandments, and you were keeping Sabbath. We're gonna go. This little 17-year-old girl over here who's a Sunday goer. We're gonna go bless her with a vision, because it's not as important. She's special. You're not. You kept the commandments. But that's not special. I don't want someone who kept the commandments. I want someone else. So I just feel like it's kind of like a message, like a slap in the face, like Sabbath's not that important, commandment keeping's not that important. We're going to go bless someone else. I just kind of wonder why Ellen White was picked, and why this church was like the ones that were picked and not the Seventh-day Baptists or someone else.
Well, great question. I don't know. God's ways are not our ways, but I will say this. It's interesting though. If you have to say. And I do a little bit of this in our Daniel 11:40-45, but at the end of every time prophecy, God raises up a prophet. And I don't have this on the screen, and I should really do a little video on it, but I'll just summarize it quickly in this way. When God gives Abraham the prophecy or the foretelling of what would happen to his people, they'd be in bondage for 400 years. Who arises? Who does God bring up at the end of the 400 years of bondage in Egypt? What prophet comes up? Moses, right? Moses is the one that delivers God's people. He's a prophet of God. I should go back even further. You remember Methuselah? Methuselah's name means when he dies, it will come. There's fascinating when you really study the names of the Bible and what they mean. When he dies, it will come. Basically, Methuselah died the year of the flood. That's basically his name is a prophetic realization of the flood coming upon the earth. I talked about the time period of the 400 years in bondage. God raises up a prophet, Moses. 70 years of captivity, that prophecy. Well, who does God raise up? Daniel. Daniel's a prophet during that time. Daniel prophesies about the 70 weeks. What prophet comes up at the 70 weeks? Well, of Christ was certainly a prophet, but also the apostles are risen up to proclaim the message. Then you have to ask yourself, well, what about the times and half a time and the 2300 evenings and mornings? All those time periods that were fulfilled 1798 to 1844. There has to be prophetic activity based upon the patterns of the past. There has to be. Joel 2 says, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. Men, your men and daughters, you know the verse, will prophesy, young men will dream dreams, but men and women will do that. Now, why he chose her, I have no idea, but it confirms that prophetic activity. Now, there was also false prophetic activity. Satan knew that, and he rose up many false prophets to obscure the word, because there's a controversy over the law of God. And I'll just point this out to you. Go to the reason why the commandments are so important, we hold to all 10 of them, is because if we go to Revelation 12:17, and I'll just verbalize it, so the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Now that verse, Revelation 12:17, that is pointing, that is the dragon's enraged with the woman, talking about heavenly Jerusalem. But he goes off to make war with these people who keep the commandments of God, keep all the commandments of God, and hold to the testimony of Jesus. The war is Revelation 13. That's the mark of the beast. And I believe that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was established to hold steady all of God's 10 commandments. There has to be a loud proclamation that goes throughout the world. The Sabbath has not been changed. That it is the holy Sabbath, seventh day, Saturday, because Satan wants everyone to shift their allegiance from the Sabbath to Sunday. Now you might say, what's so significant about the Sabbath? Now I do a study on that in detail, and I don't want to do it right now because it literally takes me an hour to do it, because I demonstrate with exactitude why the seventh-day Sabbath is so important. But I'll just summarize it. It is the everlasting covenant. We rest in Christ Jesus, not because we keep the Sabbath. Oh, look at me, I keep the Sabbath. I'm good. Right? I'm better than you. I keep the Sabbath. No, some people do think like that. No, the Sabbath is a sign that it's the Lord our God who sanctifies us. It's only through Christ that we're saved. See, if you take away my Sabbath, you're taking away my Christ. I'm not going to let go of the Sabbath. I'm going to hold true to what the Bible says, to keep all the commandments of God, because it is the sign that it's the Lord your God who sanctifies you. I'm quoting Exodus 31:13, because in it we realize that it's only through righteousness by faith. It's only through Christ alone that we're saved. That's why, now I'll have to tell you this, my family and relatives, they don't agree with me. But when I came to this truth, I realized what was going on. And I said, no, you misunderstand me. You think I'm being a legalist by keeping the Sabbath holy, by refraining from working. I'm not a legalist. I'm recognizing what Christ said. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. During the Last Supper. Now we can have a separate discussion about this, but I just
no, because I'm a Sabbath keeper myself.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with that. The issue I have though is just that thinking that if the commandments are so important to God, why not bless the Seventh-day Baptists with a prophet and all this other stuff? Because they were the ones getting the persecuted, showing it the longest. But I just feel like God kind of ignored them and was like, well, I know you suffered persecution. You even had to run away from Europe, before Europe, but, and I know you were battling the slavery and all this other stuff for longer than everybody and holding on to it and taking, and, having everyone, just blast you for a few hundred years. But it's not that important to me. This girl over here, I'm going to instead help her just to kind of send a message to you guys about keeping Sabbath and all, that it wasn't that important to me. And then all of a sudden I'm going to change my mind and then make it important. It just strikes me as just really weird, because didn't she also have like some kind of shut door message where she was like saying, hey, if you reject this message, and this is while she was still a Sunday keeper, and because she didn't start keeping Sabbath until 1846, from my understanding.
Right.
It's like things weren't really restored in 1844, because here she is keeping Sunday and just preaching Sunday until this. And it's like, well, a Seventh-day Baptist might walk up to her and it's like, well, I reject that sanctuary message. And she would be like, well, I think it was something like, well, the door's shut on you or something like that.
Yeah,
Isn't that?
That's a great point. You know what I'd like to, I'll say this, and I think this is a great opportunity for my colleague that I work closely with. He's well read on, and I believe can answer detailed questions like you just asked. But I will say this: I'm not sure why he chose her, but it underscores the point that the church, even the Seventh-day Baptist, none of you there, the idea of multi-denominational, churches didn't emerge until after 1798. I mean, yeah, you had the Protestant Reformation. That was the big break, if you will. I mean, you had Orthodoxy, you had the two church split, if you will, a bit in the Middle Ages, but then you had the Protestant Reformation that really made a split in the church. But after 1798, you see all these denominations now pop up. Now there's probably thousands of denominations today. Everybody can believe whatever they want to. I mean, yes, you do have organized denominations, but the point is this: people were coming out of the Dark Ages. The Bible was obscured. No one had a grasp of all truth. No one has all truth. People were doing the best they could with the truth that they had and living it. And the Lord recognizes that. Everyone will be judged by what they know and convicted in their heart, not if they know the 2300 or the 70 weeks. So I don't know the great answer to your question. I see Sola Scriptura saying something. Get back to the little horn.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm back.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, man, if you wanted to get back to that little horn, we can. Because to be honest, yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of people saying something about that, because I mean, it does look like when you were answering that question, it says, how long shall endure the vision of the daily sacrifice, the iniquity of desolation tread both the sanctuary and the army underfoot. I'm also wondering like who that army is, who that's getting trampled underfoot. But when it says, and he answered unto me unto the evening morning 2300, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Like, to me, that's that whole question. It's about the daily sacrifice, or the daily and the iniquity of the desolation to tread both the sanctuary and the army underfoot. So that question is encompassing all this stuff that's talking about the little horn up here and the activities of the little horn. And I'm just saying, like, if this thing starts in 457 BC, we should see something happening to this daily sacrifice and the iniquity to tread of the desolation to tread both the sanctuary and army underfoot. And it's just a really weird place to start this when in 457 BC, the decree to Ezra, the decree of Artaxerxes goes out, and here Artaxerxes is giving Ezra all this money to buy animals, start the sacrifice, restore Jerusalem. They're rebuilding Jerusalem, but at the same time, to start this 2300 and say, well, no, the sacrifice is actually being stopped right there, and the desolation, the sanctuary is actually being tread. and being desolated. It's like, well, it like, to me, that doesn't jive. Like, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah.
Because I guess what I'm looking for, just to say one more point, is it's like, okay, so what was happening in 458 BC, and then suddenly Artaxerxes gets that decree, and we can see something change. Like, we're starting to see persecution or something, or like there was nothing going on from 458 and before. Then all of a sudden, from in 457 BC, we see a change, and then for up until 1844, we see this whole thing going on, and then it stops. And so what's all this that's going on in between that starts in 457 and then stops in 1844?
Yeah, I would say this. I think we have to be careful. I don't know if this is going to be an answer. I don't know if this is going to satisfy your answer. But, when you go back to 13, Holy One speaking to another Holy One, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? And what I hear you saying is, you're saying, well, that looks like it's going to apply for the entire 2,300 evenings and mornings, based
Correct.
upon the next verse, right?
Yeah.
The only thing that I'd be careful to do is to say this. All he says is for 2,300 evenings and mornings, the holy place will be properly restored. It just says it's going to be restored. It doesn't say that the regular sacrifice applies to the entire 2,300. I think that's what we have to be careful of. It just says, how long will the vision, and it doesn't say about is italicized, the regular sacrifice apply, hatamid apply. See, the hatamid, and I go into more detail in the videos, is it's the law of God. It's the new covenant. It is the gospel. It is the ministry of Jesus Christ. It is the eternal covenant. How long will the kadzon, again, about regarding the regular sacrifice apply? See, it's talking about that subversion of the law, of the gospel, of the ministry of Christ, when the place of his sanctuary is thrown down. And that's where we say, okay, well, that the kadzon regarding this regular sacrifice, we know how long that occurred. It was that times and half a time in Daniel 7. But it falls within the framework of the entire 2,300 evenings and mornings.
Yeah, I would just say, like in verse 11, it says, and he extolled himself against the prince of the hosts, from whom the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary cast down. And then a time shall be given over to him over the daily sacrifice for iniquity, and it shall cast down the truth to the ground, and thus shall it do and prosper. And then it sounds like they're asking, how long shall endure the vision of the daily sacrifice? Well, what do you mean with the vision of the daily sacrifice? When we go up to verse 11, it says the daily sacrifice was taken away. So, okay, so it was taken away. So how long is this going to endure? And so it sounds like it's from the moment it's taken away in verse 11. Because I don't know what else it could mean. How long shall endure the vision of the daily sacrifice, and the iniquity of the desolation tread both the sanctuary and army underfoot? And then it sounds like, I know you're saying like 2,000, and then it'd be it'd be restored or cleansed after 2,300 mornings. And you're saying you focus on the end, but something had to happen at the beginning in order for in order to even need to do the end.
Yeah, I would say we don't see that okay, so here's this. There's someone asking a question who doesn't know the answer, and someone who knows the answer. But so I heard a holy one speaking to another holy one, and he asked a question. Now, how long? Now remember, how long will the vision? Now again, vision is kadzon. It's talking about the kadzon in totality, but it's saying the vision about the regular sacrifice. It's saying of the kadzon vision that has just transpired from ram to goat to little horn, how long is the regular sacrifice going to apply? How long is that going to be?
For 2300.
We don't read it that way. It just says for 2300 evening and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored.
Right. So basically how
You
I would
understand?
say it.
Yep, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I do. So basically how I'd read 13 and 14 is, if I was to ask you, hey, how long, John, is it until you come over to my house? You say, for 1 hour, and then I'll be at your house. It seems 14 is just a pretty straightforward answer to the question, for how long is the kazon concerning the regular burnt offering? It seems pretty straightforward to me. Excuse me. And I think that the word kazon here is being used differently than in verse 2, because it's concerning, or it's about the regular burnt offering, whereas the kazon in verse 2 is just saying Daniel is receiving a visionary experience.
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish my colleague were here to interact with this. I'm gonna I'd like to interact with him about it and see if we can get back to you, because
Yeah, no rush.
yeah, it's a good question. But I do want to make sure, and I know we went through a lot. I don't want to repeat it all. But do you also recognize how we're pointing out that the mare, there's two visions?
Yes.
Okay, and that the mare is part of the larger 2300?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I follow you there.
Okay, yeah, and that's why, because when we do Daniel 8:26 and 9:24 and say 70 weeks have been decreed, then we know that's why we conclude, well, okay, the COD zone starts in 457, but that doesn't mean that the activity of the removal of the daily begins in 457. That's not how we see it.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I see. I mean, I'm still kind of still stuck on the whole that question in 13 really just pretty much seems straightforward to me, though, that the daily sacrifice has to get stopped. The sanctuary, something has to happen to the sanctuary, and just naturally seems like when you're saying how long, well, how long from when it's, this happens to the sanctuary, the sacrifices, the daily is taken away, and the sanctuary is cast down, and then you're going like, well, how long? So we know it starts. So even if you want to say, well, it's just talking about the end, then the sanctuary would be cleansed. Well, it naturally assumes that, I mean, just given the context of the first couple of verses from 11 to 13, when you get down to 13, it's like it seems very natural that you're going to think that when it says the sanctuary will be cleansed, well, something had to dirty it up or take something away, and it's like, well, it's talking about the daily sacrifice being taken away. So it seems natural to start the 2300 from when that sacrifice is taken away, and you end it when it gets clean. Like if a kid spills a drink on the floor, I'm like, how long is that going to take you to clean that up? Well, the floor wasn't clean. My kid spilled a drink, and if he tells me, until the morning, I'll be like, okay, until the morning, it's going to take my son to clean that drink, starting from when he spilled it,
But I think this is just underscoring the terminus, the end of, or the beginning, if you will, the beginning of when the holy place is restored.
Right, but if I tell my kid, how long is it going to take for you to clean that drink up, and he goes,
he's just
from 11 hours from when I spill it, or maybe my kid's like, I think, Dad, I'm going to go fix the car. When I come home, it's not going to work. And I'm like, well, how long are you going to take it apart for? And he goes, I'm going to take it apart from 6 o'clock evening to, the next day at 6 a.m. I'm going to be like, okay, so from the taking part, so the car's going to be taken apart at this date, and then it's going to be put back together, or there's going to be like a 12-hour period. Like if I say, well, like let's say I just walk in and I'm like, my kid just told me it's going to take me about 12 hours to fix the car, but I got to take it all apart. It's not going to work for 12 hours. And I'm like, okay, but he doesn't tell me when he's going to do it. And then I just show up and I'm like, oh, okay, he's starting to take the car apart. It's going to be about 12 hours, So,
okay.
But there's something happening,
Okay, that's a great. Let me run with that analogy. Let's say my kids can't drive yet, so, But let's say your kid takes your car and does some errands, and he says, I'm going to drive to, the shopping mall, then I'm going to go to the grocery store, and then I'm going to, then I'm actually, you know what I'm going to do? I know this sounds crazy, Dad, but I'm going to take the car apart. And I'm going to take it apart, and it's not going to be drivable for a while. And then you say, how long is all that going to take you? How long? You're saying you're going to the store, and then you're going to do, how long are you going to allow that car to be taken apart? That's a horrible thing. And all your kid answers with you and says, it'll be fixed by 12 noon tomorrow. He doesn't tell you in this passage, he doesn't tell you when that car is taken apart. We have to get those clues from chapter 7. We have to get that from some other location and in prophetic history. He's just saying it'll be fixed at 12 noon. That's the way we see verse 14. For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place is restored. And that's why the Mare Hadzon says, okay, well, if the vision, the Hadzon is 457 BC, the fixing doesn't happen until 2,300 evenings and mornings. It doesn't say anything about how long that regular sacrifice is removed. We have to pick that up from another chapter, chapter 7.
I don't know why we can't pick it up from here, because because why would something need to be restored if it's not messed up?
Well, that's the issue, though. It obviously is messed up, because it's something really bad happened to the church, and it was decimated.
Okay, so I would say from when it got cleansed, if we count backwards 2,300, then that would probably land right on the spot where it got messed up. Because if it's longer than that, if it's been messed up longer than that, then we got to go back further than that, and then it can't be 2,300.
I see what you're saying. You know what? I have never looked at it that way before. It's a great question, and you just made me think about this in a new way. I'm gonna get an answer for you, because
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, because I don't, and it may take me a little bit to figure it out, but I understand what you're saying now, because we naturally see that and just say it's going to get fixed at this point in time. That's all it says to us in verse 14. It says, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place is properly restored. It just says at this point in time, it's going to be fixed, or it's going to be, restored to its proper order. Not, and I see what you're saying. You're saying, well, how long does it apply? Oh, it's going to apply for 2,300 evenings and mornings.
Yeah, right. Because if you count backwards, that should take you back to when it was not proper, when it was proper.
Right. But I think so. Here's the only points that I would put forth related to this. We know that the Hadzon, the vision of Daniel 8 begins with the Hadzon, and it starts with the ram, the goat, little horn. But the destruction, or the decimation, if you will, of that church during the Middle Ages doesn't happen right away. It happens in sequence of the Hadzon at a point sometime after the little horn grows horizontally. When it starts to grow vertically, then the horror begins, because now you've got stars being trampled, right? You've got this sanctuary thrown down, lifted up, thrown down, foundation lifted up, thrown down. So that doesn't happen back during the time of the ram. So I would say, by logical implication, you can't extend the activity of that little horn all the way back to the ram. It can't happen during the ram. It doesn't happen during the time of the ram. That's only talking about the Medo-Persia, the then leader of the then world of Medo-Persia, and then it moves to Greece. Does that make sense?
Right, yeah, because I would agree that the little horn doesn't come up until much later, and that's why I have another issue, because all those activities from verses 9 through 12, those all seem to have to do with the little horn.
Right.
And so I'm also would be tying that 2300 into it, because when it's asking me that question, it's talking about it shall endure the vision of the daily sacrifice, the iniquity of the desolation, tread both the sanctuary. Well, who's doing all that stuff in verse 13? Well, if you look in verses 9 through 12, we can clearly see it's the little horn doing all that. So therefore, when it's given us that answer to that question in verse 13, how long? Well, verse 14 is 2300. So who's that 2300 tied to? It's tied back to the little horn, and then it clearly looks like that little horn does not come forth until that large horn's broken. Because I don't know why else it would talk about the large horn being broken and 4 coming up out of it, and then it says out of one of them came forth a little horn. Well, it doesn't even talk about, even if you want to say the winds, it's coming out of one of the winds. Well, it still doesn't look like the winds or the directions. It's not even talking about that until verse 8. So it seems like it's gotta happen after 323 BC, since that's when Alexander the Great died and the kingdom of Greece got broken up into 4.
Right. Yeah, agree. And I think that's why. And again, where we're at with the horizontal power of the horn, the horizontal phase of the little horn, the horizontal phase is Rome, moving from Medo-Persia, Greece to Rome. But then Rome transitions. We know Rome transitions in history to from the Roman Empire to the what? Holy Roman Empire, church-state system. But all of that, verse 10, 11, 12, that doesn't happen until after Rome, after pagan Rome, right? I think we agree on that.
Well, no, I mean, because to be honest, I think this whole thing is talking about Antiochus. I'm just trying to give you your side.
Okay, I see.
Because I'm a firm believer that it makes sense with the Antiochus, because he was broken without. I mean, because he died from a disease, so it wasn't like he didn't get killed in battle, wasn't murdered, and everything from verses in Daniel 11 all the way up to verse 35. I mean, I think that does a very accurate account from Media Persia all the way to Greece and everything that happened with him. And then I think, in verse 36, it starts to transfer to Rome.
In Daniel 11?
Yeah, in Daniel 11, verse 36, I think that's when it starts to shift to Rome.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we have Rome appearing in verse basically 16. It's way back. Because and I'm glad you clarified that. So now I know how to consider developing some other points on that, since I know you believe Rome appears in verse 36. Again, I'll just go back to this. If you and are you then applying the 2300 evenings and mornings as a literal, like
I think it's sacrifices. I think it's
6.5 years
over
or so,
1,150 days.
So 1,000. Okay.
Yeah,
so
I
basically
believe it
it's
starts like in 167 to 164.
Okay. All right.
And it starts with the it doesn't start exactly when he sets up the idol to Zeus. It starts and sacrifices the pig on the altar. I believe it starts when he invades Jerusalem, and I think he goes into the sanctuary and steals the menorah and all that other stuff.
So what's the reasoning behind taking the symbols of Daniel 8, like ram, goat, horn, and then transitioning and not taking the time period as also symbolic?
I do think there's some kind of larger symbolic, some larger message that God's trying to speak to. I haven't really looked into that yet, but I mean, I would definitely, because it is odd that he's choosing to use a goat and a ram, and we do know that those are, like you said, those are animals he used in sacrifice and in the sanctuary. So I think there definitely is something deeper that's trying to be told in the text. I haven't really thought that through yet.
Yeah.
So when you brought that up, that's a point I kind of forgot about.
I do believe in the Bible, and I forget where exactly. It's been a while since I've looked, but I do believe ram and goats are also used to refer to certain Gentile nations, and I can't remember where, if it's in Ezekiel or something. So it doesn't necessarily have to be referring or symbolic of the sanctuary. It could be, as possible, but the Bible definitely uses the symbols in more than one way, is what I would say to that.
Right, but I guess, okay, thank you for that. I guess my question would be,
I didn't know about that either.
How do you reconcile the use of symbols in, I'm going to extend it to Daniel 7 and 8, and then shift to literal interpretations of the time prophecies? So we see symbol, 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 but when it comes to time prophecies, we say literal. What's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, it would be the 2300 would be symbolic for the 1150, which is why evenings and mornings are used to refer to the Tamid. Because remember, the Kazon is about or concerning the Tamid, especially, and also the other activity. But back in verse 11, it also does focus on the Tamid as well.
So, okay, thank you.
So it would be symbolic, but symbolic for 1150.
So how do you get 1150 from 2300 evenings and mornings? Like, for example, if an evening and morning is considered one day, right? Like,
Right.
go back all the way back to Genesis, evening and morning, day one, evening and morning, day two. If you have 2300 evenings and mornings, why would you cut that in half then?
Because that's sacrifice. I believe it sacrifices that it's laid out in Numbers 28.
Yeah.
If you read it, and then my whole thing is, it's also I believe it's not plural, so that's another reason why you wouldn't take it as literal days, because they have it in the singular. It's Erev and Bokur. It would be like Erevim or something like that, and Bokurim, if I'm not mistaken, would be the plural form. And so if you want to say 2300 like evening mornings and you're referencing days, you would say it in the plural form instead of the singular form, to my understanding.
Interesting. All right.
That's something I just learned today, so I don't expect you to. I just stumbled across that earlier when I was like looking up some things right before the show, so I don't expect you to, know that or have a response to that.
No, that's okay. But it's helping me to understand the perspective you're coming at it from, and I'll look into that. I want to dig into this some more, because you're asking some good questions. You obviously understand where we're coming from in the broadest sense. We're taking it as a day for year, but
Right.
I see your point. The only thing is, wouldn't it be, even if it is I just looked it up. Yeah, I see it is singular. Wouldn't it be an evening and morning? Wouldn't that constitute a day, though?
Well, I just think because it's talking about the sacrifices, and that's all they really referred to. It was like an evening and a morning sacrifice. Like they didn't really have a more developed word for it until I think it was like much later, like after this was written, and then I think it was like a couple of 100 years later where they started actually. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, where they started calling the sacrifice a different name for the morning and a different name for the evening.
Okay.
But it was well after this Daniel was written.
So let me shift gears and ask you this question. What are your thoughts on Daniel 7? Because the way we view it is basically. Can I share this screen? Let me.
Oh yeah.
Let me do this. I'll put it up in a second. What are your thoughts on this? Hold on a second. On this graphic, because we see, successive world kingdoms in Daniel 2 and the same in Daniel 7, and we apply the same in Daniel 8. And so when in fact, I'll just scroll down to show you our 8. When we fill in 8, we're just marching down the sequence of the text. And let me pull up the final one, which is right here. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Because we're trying to be consistent with the previous prophecies that have already been developed. So we're just building upon that.
Yeah. So I would agree with Chris about it, referring to Antiochus and the antics that he did against the Jews. So it would be, chapter 8 would be focused in on the leopard. So for example, the 4 horns will be the same as the 4 heads.
Yep.
And on the leopard. And it's also the 4 kingdoms in verse, 23 of chapter 8. So I believe verses 20 to 25 just recapitulate what verses 3 to 14 talk about.
Okay.
Minus go ahead.
No, go. Yeah. So, because what we see is, especially when it comes to this point about, this, out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful land. Naturally, if after you complete the ram and the goat, and then you hear about this little horn now growing exceedingly great toward the south, east, toward the beautiful land, how would you apply that to Antiochus? Because Antiochus certainly did not do that. Because we see it, I'll just show you the graphic where we put it. We say, okay, toward the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful land, exceedingly great would say Roman Empire to us. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So let me go to chapter 8.
Yeah, if you want me to bring your present your screen, I can do that too.
So I do believe chapter 11 talks about the career of Antiochus in a lot more detail, and I don't have all the details memorized in my head, unfortunately. But basically, from verse, I think 3 all the way down to 35 is about the career of Antiochus.
In Daniel 11?
In Daniel chapter 11, yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And then verse 36 will transition to the 4th beast, because I believe each vision is based off of the 5 kingdom scheme, is what I call it. It's just with chapter 8, it's focused and zoomed in on the 3rd beast. Because,
okay.
for example, in your presentation there, it shows the 4th beast as a little horn. But when we look at all the visions, the 4th beast is just the 4th beast. It never starts as a little horn.
Right. But do you see also in verse, yeah. So, okay, that's really interesting. That's fascinating, because we don't see Antiochus anywhere in Daniel 11 other than the attempt by the Maccabees in verse 16, or sorry, verse 14, to fulfill the vision, and they fail.
Right.
That's where we see the attempt, because they try to establish the vision. They try to say, we cleanse the sanctuary. And what I'm going to do is I don't have this video out yet. I'm going to do a detailed analysis of every single verse, every single king, put dates on it, beginning with Darius the Mede in Daniel 11:1-1. And I'll show you how quickly we get to Rome, which appears, we believe, in basically verse 16. But that's really interesting. So I'm taking some mental notes here, because I really do want to interact with you all on this some more. But how about the exceedingly great, though? Back
Yeah.
in Daniel 8,
Yes.
verse 10. How do you reconcile that? Like
So
what territory would that be then?
I think in general that refers to Antiochus's career and like I said, some of that is explained like towards the south, especially. The king of the south would be the Ptolemies. And that's explained in verses, in chapter 11. The king of the south and the north. So the north would be Antiochus, south would be the Ptolemies. But also specifically in verse 10 and 11, it explains how it grows and what this exceedingly great is really referring to. It grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the hosts and some of the stars it threw down and trampled. So it persecuted God's people. And also, I would note that it is also um, dealing with the transgressors. And I believe the transgressors are the Jews here.
In which verse?
Verse 12. I kind of hopped down to verse 12 because I wanted to make note of that.
Oh,
So
okay, yeah,
it says the host will be given over to it. I say that it is the little horn together with the regular. So notice they're together with the regular burnt offering, which is what
right,
I believe the calzone is about. Because notice the because of transgression. So all this is happening because of transgressions. So
right.
I would say that those are the Jews that caused that.
So here's where I don't know if you heard my earlier argument on that the theme of Daniel is in the first two verses of the entire book. So basically, in the first two verses of Daniel, you see Nebuchadnezzar attacking the city, taking God's people captive, taking the vessels out of the holy temple and removing it to the temple of his God.
Yeah.
And that is the pattern for what would happen to God's church. God's church would be taken captive. The ministry of Christ would be subverted. And his ministry would be thrown down. It would be obscured. The daily would be removed from him. And the church would be taken into medieval captivity for a time, times, and half a time. That's why we see the pattern of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is a type of an antichrist, again, before his conversion, of what would happen to the church in the future. And what we see is that same pattern of attack on the sanctuary, attack on God's people, taking them captive, appears in verses 10, 11, and 12. And it also appears in verses, the same language appears in verses Daniel 11, 31, 32, 33, and 34. It's attack. If you go to Daniel 11, 31, it's basically, I'm just opening up my Bible, but basically Daniel 11, 31, the same language of Daniel 10 to 12 appears. And we'll walk through it as soon as Chris is there. So it's like 31. I know I think you're using the
Geneva. I just prefer it just because it's got all the footnotes and everything.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I have NASB, but desecrate sanctuary forest, do away with the regular sacrifice. Again, that's Hatamid. Set up the abomination of desolation. By verse 33, they're falling by sword, by flame, by captivity, by plunder. All of that. And so that's where we see is those verses are really the Middle Ages, the church state system, because again of the pattern of it matches Daniel 8, 10 to 12, and it also matches the original framework pattern of Daniel 1 verses 1 and 2.
Gotcha.
Just food for thought.
Right. Hold on. You're saying the verses 31 through 35 matches the framework of Daniel 12?
No, matches the essentially what's going on in Daniel 8, 10 to 12.
Oh, 8, 10 to 12.
Yeah. Because it uses basically the same, removes does away with the regular sacrifice.
Yeah, I would agree with all that.
Yeah.
This is exactly what Maccabees records too.
Yeah, but we see, yeah, okay, that makes sense, because we don't see the Maccabee. We see the Maccabees back in verse 14. But that's interesting. Okay, so now I think I've got a beat on how you guys frame this up.
Oh yeah, if you go to like a 1599 Geneva Bible, you can kind of like I pretty much agree with all the footnotes in it. Even if you don't agree with it, you can at least know where all the Protestants stood, because that's pretty much like everyone got persecuted and thrown into Geneva. And so it's like all the people that were willing to put their life on the line and create a Bible in Geneva, these were the footnotes they felt they should put in the Bible and were willing to risk their life for it. So, you at least know that they were willing to die for a lot of this stuff, for that much. So,
Yeah,
even if you don't agree with it, at least, this is what all the Protestants, were teaching at the time.
right. And that makes sense. I know I've had some other study Bibles that had footnotes, and I couldn't agree with them because it just didn't reconcile with what I was reading. And that's why that's why I think the Mare Hadzon framework is so critical, because do you guys understand, though, that we believe that the Mare Hadzon framework applies to Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, 12?
Yes.
Like when I pointed out Daniel 10, he comes in and says, I'm going to explain to you the vision, the Hadzon, and then he does so beginning in verse 11. Okay, if you guys understand that. What are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious. Is that, I'm assuming that's new. The Mare Hadzon framework is new. Had you heard that before? Had others shared that with you?
I'm still trying to understand it personally. It's a little confusing to me because I'm seeing calzone in some parts of it. And I'm not understanding like why I'm starting to understand how you're cutting it off here and splicing in Mare there, and then I think I'm starting to understand it. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around how all that's working, because when I see calzone and I see that 2300, and then I see calzone in verses, I don't know, somewhere around verses what is it, like 1 through 4, somewhere around there in Daniel 8.
Yeah.
I'm like thinking, okay, this is the whole calzone right here, and this in the 2300s within this calzone, and
Well,
then so that's where I just get confused at.
that makes sense. And I will say this, I apologize, because I normally don't condense it into, 15 and 20-minute chunks. I let you can check out our videos in terms of, I walk it through much slower. But live, we're interacting live, and I didn't want to take, because we have maybe, between Daniel's 8 and 9, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe about 6 hours worth of explanation. So if you have that time, if you can, even if you were just to watch like a half an hour or an hour a week, I think you would have our full position and would understand exactly why we hold to this. But it's going to be at a much slower pace, because I'm going through it as if someone had no idea what these verses were about.
Hey, someone does got a question. I'll go ahead and read it because a couple of people said it was a good question. I haven't even read it yet. So it says, John, hi, is your basis for interpreting the Prince of the Covenant and Daniel 11:22 being Jesus predicated on the preterist 70th week from Daniel 9:27, confirming a covenant with many for 1 week?
Broadly, I would say yes, but it's mostly based upon the fact that, again, I go back to the Mare Hadzon framework. If the Mare is about the mighty man, the Prince of the Covenant, I should say the Prince of Princes in Daniel 8:25, then, and the Mare is part of the Kadzone, then we should see the Mare in the Kadzone when it's explained in Daniel 11:22. And that's exactly what we do. We see Prince of the Covenant. But it is tied to Daniel 9, 24 to 27, because he does establish a firm covenant. It says he will make a firm covenant. He will confirm a mighty, a prevailing covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So if that answers your question, yeah, we do see him there, Jesus in 9:27 and 11:22. Because this is talking about the new covenant, and that's why the new covenant is so critical, because that's where it begins with in 9:24. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people in your holy city to do what? Well, to finish the transgression, make an end of sin, make atonement for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness. Christ brings in everlasting righteousness with the new covenant.
I'm just kind of bringing up what the 1599 Geneva writers thought, because they said, meaning Ptolemaeus Philopater's son, who was this child's cousin Germain, and here is called the Prince of the Covenant because he was the chief, and all others followed his conduct. So just throwing that out there for food for thought. I don't quite understand it because I have to read that part of history better.
Yeah, let me interact with that. I definitely I believe that's extraordinarily off. I'm going to pull up. Let me pull up a slide. 1 second.
Sure, that'd be interesting.
Because this will give you food for thought on that passage right there. I want to pull up actually a Daniel 2. Let's see.
It's always surprising how much I can learn out of Daniel, even after studying almost nothing but it for a year.
Yeah, no, and it still goes on. We're still discovering many more things, and we're all students of the Bible. We're all learning. Let me give you food for thought on this. I'm going to let me go back and I'll share this screen with you. Oh, I'll show on your screen. Okay. Okay. Can you see that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Notice, I'm going to pick it up in Daniel 11:20-21. I've highlighted a couple of words here. Now, I'm going to be very upfront with you. We already see Rome appearing. And why do we see Rome? We saw a Rome in verse 16, but I will just say this. Look at what it says. Then in his place one will arise an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom. Yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. And in green, I've got, in his place a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. But he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. The overflowing forces are flooded away and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. Now, we believe this is Rome because it explains it in the New Testament. You see, the oppressor in verse 20 is Caesar Augustus. Why? He sent out his census. Why? Because he would tax this region. That's called an oppressor. That's what an oppressor does. And notice that this oppressor in verse 20, through the jewel of his kingdom, is talking about Palestine, Judea. But then it says, yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. And that was true. Caesar Augustus was the most favored first citizen of the Roman Empire, and the people loved him. He did not die in anger or in battle. He died of old age, I think at the age of 62. That's why this is confirmed. A few days he will be shattered. And it says a few days. Again, day for your principle. He doesn't die in a few days. He dies in a few years. Men's lives are like vapor. They're but just a few days. Okay? Verse 21, in his place a despicable person will arise. Well, we don't have to guess who came after Caesar Augustus. The Bible also describes that. You don't have to flip far, but go to Luke 3. Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Now Tiberius Caesar was not of the bloodline of Augustus. He was adopted, and he was despised to the most highest degree. The Senate hated him. People hated him, and he was absolutely despicable. Can't even talk about the things that he did. So that verse 21 definitely describes Tiberius Caesar. Honor of kingship has not been conferred. Again, he was adopted. He'll come in a time of tranquility. Tranquility, Pax Romana. When Caesar Augustus at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, I should say 31 BC, comes on the scene. I mean, we're talking about that ushered in the Pax Romana for the next 200 years. And so that's why we believe we're in the time period of Rome right here. And he seizes the kingdom by intrigue. He would always be cagey with the Senate. Notice the overflowing forces will be flooded before him and shattered, and also the Prince of the Covenant. And I just would put, basically, Jesus Christ is the Prince of the Covenant. He was crucified under the authority of Tiberius Caesar's reign. I should say the reign of Pontius Pilate, who was under Tiberius Caesar's reign. So that's why we're more prone to interpret let the Bible kind of guide us through some of these difficult passages, and make sure we stick with that. So I just wanted to provide that as food for thought regarding what's going on in Daniel 11. That I actually address in our Daniel 2 video, because some people say, well, is Rome in the Bible? And I try to address that early on. And it is definitely, in fact, Claudius is also in the Bible in Acts. I don't go to all the scriptures, but it's, not too far of a stretch. But, well, I think, what I'd like to do, Chris, maybe,
well, we went almost 3.5 hours now. So
I know.
I was surprised you stayed on this long. I was going to be happy just getting 2 hours out of you. So, well,
I'm excited about this stuff, and I can go all night if we needed to, but I know I'm pretty tired. I had a long week. But how about if we do this? Could we, at some point in the future, I'd like to have my colleague and partner in the ministry join us. I think he could close some gaps that I might not be able to fully address to your satisfaction.
Yeah, sure. But I probably have to do it in at least 2 or 3 weeks. Now, Sola Scriptura, he might be able to do something sooner. I work 70 hours a week, so I'm limited to one show a week. And people have been getting on me about doing so much stuff about Daniel, and they want me to talk about other subjects. I'm like, and then I got like some guests I've been wanting to get on for a while, and so I want to try to get these other guests on.
Yeah, no problem. Even if it's a month later or something, I'd like to keep in touch with you all. I'd like to interact.
So I mean, at least maybe 3 weeks to a month from now. But like I said, I know Sola Scriptura, he was looking for other Seventh-day Adventists to come on a show and interact with.
Okay.
If you'd like to interact with him, and one more thing, if you want to take this show and you want to upload the entire thing, like, I don't care. To me, it's like when I have guests on here, especially when they're at least, like, even 50 to 25% of my show, they're always welcome to upload the entire show to their channels, make money off of it, do whatever they want with it.
Oh, thank you. No, this is fine. I view this more as just a personal Bible study interaction with another believer. I'm just very grateful and honored that I was able to interact with you. And I want to say this, I feel like we could be certainly friends in the future, and I want to stay in touch with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely a likable person, man. I'm actually very impressed with, like, the way you can tie everything together, man. I was like, that's some of the stuff you were saying was kind of genius, even if I disagree with it.
Well, thanks. I mean,
that's what I was thinking a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, I totally get, and I have some other friends who are actually are Sunday keepers, and I've had them in my classes at church. This is pre-COVID because everything got shut down, but Yeah. I see that coming in the
comment
Roman
was-
Catholic Church. Yeah.
Yeah, you ought to join forces and expose the 1.4 billion pound elephant in the room, the Roman Catholic Church. Which I do a lot of videos talking about the
Yeah.
Roman Catholic Church.
Well,
So
I'll
I mean,
say,
also after doing this, man, I'm going to take down that one video about the Ezra that I did with you, and I mean, I was kind of frustrated because someone mentioned it to me, and I'm watching it, man. I'm like, okay, but now after listening to you, I'm like, you did a pretty good defense of your beliefs, and I gotta find out a better way if I really want to like push back at it. Like I want to find like a stronger way to do it now. So.
yeah, no, that's good. And we totally understand that people will disagree with us. I don't have any problem with that. I'm searching for truth. We're all searching for truth. We all want the truth. We all want to be with Jesus when he returns. We want to be ready for end times. I do believe we are entering. I think it's quite possible. We can have a conversation about this another time. I think it's quite possible that we may be. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Appreciate it. I'm actually a kind of a lay pastor. I'm an elder in my church. So just to officially put that out there, but act as my senior pastor has called me. I'm acting as a capacity of a lay pastor. But if you guys want to check out our videos on our website, angelsontheglen.org, I go much slower and I go through it meticulously through every verse. Again, this is kind of like I was trying to crunch everything in together in this 2-hour time span. So I just want to thank Chris for hosting and just appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, this also got broadcast out to Rumble and Odyssey, so there might be quite a few people that watched it. I haven't checked the other streams yet. So.
Okay. But I would like to maybe keep this in the back of your mind. If you could, whenever is a good time, it can be, a few weeks, it could be a month, it could be 2 months. I'd like to bring my colleague on because
definitely. That'd be great.
I understand that where the sticking points of where we differ in Daniel 8, and I want to interact with him because I may not, maybe his perspective, he may understand something and say, aha, I know what they're grappling with, and this is how I would explain it. So I think I'd like to do that.
All right. Solo, you got anything you want to add to it before we cut out?
I just appreciate the interaction that we had, and John, your presentation was definitely impressive, and you flowed very well. I appreciate it very much, and I thank you for the kind words that we had back and forth. And I thank you for your time as well. I think you're in the East Coast, right?
East Coast, yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty late right now, so I definitely very much appreciate your time.
Oh, yeah, it's like 1:30 where we're at.
Yeah.
It's 10:30 over here, so I'm not too bad.
Not too bad. I can when you get me talking about the Bible, I forget about the time. But
yes,
now that I see the time, I better go to bed.
Yeah, I'm like, man, you probably got stuff to do in the morning.
I do. I'll weather through it. But this has been great talking with you all. So appreciate it. Can I close this out in prayer? Would that be okay?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. Father God, I just thank you for this time to interact with my brothers and sisters in Christ. We love you, and we love your word. We love your Bible. Though we may differ on understanding and interpretations, we can still put our faith in you and trust in you and your second coming. And I just ask that you bless everyone on this video broadcast tonight, that you continue to pour out your Holy Spirit upon everyone here, that we would grow in the Lord, and that your fruit would be made manifest in our lives, that everyone we come in contact with would see the fruit of love and joy and peace and long-suffering and gentleness and goodness and faith and meekness and self-control, and that they would look to you, Christ Jesus, because they would see Christ in us, the hope of glory. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, it was great having you on, John. Appreciate your time, man.
Thanks. You too. All right. God bless.
All right. Yep.
All right.
Later.
Bye.
Well, I'll see you later, Brandon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I mean, I tell you, he hit me with some stuff, man. I kind of wasn't expecting, so I didn't know how to really, yeah, I didn't know how to follow along with it. Some of it, at least when it started doing that whole calzone moray stuff. So
Yeah, there was stuff I want to get into, but I mean, maybe another time. No big deal.
yeah, there's definitely some stuff I'm going to bring up next time. So
The way he interprets verse 15 through 17 with the Mara and stuff, I would say it different. But
well, that's what I was hoping you'd get more into, but man, maybe next time. You know, you can probably set up a show with them when you
yeah,
got
I
time.
might have to. I'm just when it's somebody new, I'm very respectful and I have a hard time just butting in. I always feel bad. I can't help
Oh
it.
my gosh, man! Like, no, yeah, I mean, I feel the same way too. But my main point was I wanted to make sure that everyone understood exactly where he's coming from.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to interrupt them too much because it's like, okay, you know, like build your still man case, and then okay, you know, do we got enough of the still man case? And he actually doesn't seem like he freaks out when you push back. So
Right.
that's where I'm like, okay, so and he actually seemed like he was very considerate of the whole point about the 2300 when I asked him to go backwards.
Yes, that was a good point. Yes.
So that's going to be very interesting to interact with him again, man, and hear how he answers the 2300. You know, when you go backwards, and once he talks to his friend. Dude, man, I'm just, I don't know about you. I was sitting there like, wow, like you're some kind of genius like, to be able to just finagle all this out of this, man.
It's
Like,
it's in depth, honestly, and it's like that's one of the issues I have with it is when you just read verse 13 and 14, anybody just read verses 13 and 14. There's a question and there's an answer. And the time frame is answering the question.
right,
It's pretty
that's what
straightforward.
I'm really hoping for, and I think he kind of understood that pretty well. So,
Yeah. Alrighty, man.
yeah, I don't want to talk too much without him being here because he might feel like, but I feel like we're saying decent things about him. So, and
Yeah.
he already heard most of it anyway. And
Yeah. He was really pleasant to talk to. I enjoyed
yes,
talking to
I
him.
think he was probably the best 17th Adventist I've talked to yet. So,
I concur.
yeah, I mean, and that's before I got on bad terms with the Advent. But because I thought, dude, I mean, honestly, I felt like if I would have recorded like everything, to be honest, it would have put them in a better light. Even if you're thinking they're wrong and it sounds terrible, it's like like the conversations we had, like you could hear that they're like real people, and you might, because I see how bitter people get in the comment sections of some of these like Adventist videos and exposing Adventist videos. And
Yep.
it's like, I was like, well, you got to kind of still remember these are people.
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
And it's like, you know, and so I'm really glad John came on and presented himself like that, because I think you see like how he's really seeing it and understanding the person, and understand, you know, the depth and how he's trying to see this and that. I will say it was, when I talked to the Advent Defense League, it almost like they came across more like, look, we got this point. Why are you walking around it? Whereas John was kind of spitting out something else. But anyway, it's still like I said, still like to hear about the 2300. That's just
Yes.
amazing. We talked for almost 3.5 hours. And
Yeah. And I came in late. You guys started before me, so it was a long show. It's good.
yeah, I just feel like I've talked for about like 9 hours, you know, 3 straight weeks, and I
Yeah.
just want a real solid answer. So hopefully I get that next time.
I don't blame you there one bit.
But anyway, yeah, I'll let you go. Thanks for coming on. I might do a show tomorrow, if it depends if I go to work or not. I kind of want to talk about the that whole gay stuff going on, man, like with the Bread Alive channel and all that. And
Oh, I haven't. I saw a glimpse of it, but I haven't had a chance to look into it yet. I have no clue what's going on.
oh man, like, dude, like, I'm kind of like, gosh, here, I'll give you a sneak peek, because if I do a show tomorrow, I'll probably be on this topic. Maybe we'll go on some other topics, but
Cool.
Dude, I'm just bring her channel up real quick, man, and show this crap.
I'm trying to think of who was talking about it or exposing it that I saw. I can't remember.
Oh, I know I posted a community post about her because I was like, this is
Oh yeah, it was
yeah,
you.
this
Yeah,
right here.
yeah.
Christians can celebrate Pride Month without celebrating
It is
sin.
LGBT.
Look,
What?
she's got a pride flag right in the back of her. And she's supposed to be a Christian channel. I'm like,
Wow.
yeah, I'm really like, wow.
And she's probably 503 C, and she's supporting that. You know she's part of the agenda. No way. No, thank you. Pass.
Yeah, man. I mean, so I want to bring up like stuff like this because to be honest, it's like you keep seeing so much like Christian ecumenism, and
Oh
how
yes.
far do we go? It's like, oh well, you gotta like you can't separate just because someone's like doing this or that or believes this or that, and it's like, well, how far do you take it?
Yep.
So I mean, that's another thing. If I have a show tomorrow, I want to have a conversation. Like, how far do you just keep rolling with this stuff? Where it's like, okay, so this is okay, so this is okay, so this is okay, and now you're here.
Right. And so what can we like? Is there anything that's wrong anymore? Like, is she saying that it's okay to be homosexual and all this stuff? I'm not sure what she.
You can listen to the first kind of, I think about the first 10 minutes and get a general idea of everything.
Okay.
Like, you don't have to listen to the whole 44 minutes because I think it was like after 15 minutes, she starts having like people come in the chat. And I can't remember who asked me to subscribe to her because I guess because I can't remember, man, who all did what with her. I subscribed to her like a while ago and never watched hardly any of her stuff. And then this pops up and I'm like, what the heck is this?
Yeah, I don't blame you.
And then as you can notice, it's unsubscribed now.
Yeah,
Well,
I
no
would
one
too.
can see it. Kind of got us, but I had to unsubscribe, so it's in black now. I'm like, no.
Man, that's crazy.
Need to
We're probably
dumb
going
it
to see more of
down,
this,
but-
honestly, with Christian church. I know when I drive through the bigger towns and cities here in my state, a lot of like, especially the Presbyterian churches and the Free Baptist churches have pride flags and stuff like that on there, and they have like not just pride flags, but some of them will even have those I don't even know what they are, but they're the transgender flags. Where they have all these different colors and shapes in them, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'll pass on that. But you'll see more of it, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I could do tomorrow is just kind of play a little bit of this and just hear everyone's comments. If I can do a show, I have no idea if they're going to call me into work or not. So, but if I don't get called in, I'll just play it, and anyone that wants to come on and talk about it, I'll let them come on and air out their thoughts. But I wish Dirty Varmint says maybe she's just trying to lure them in with the flag and then convert them back to not being gay. Oh. All right, John, I guess you probably don't have my email. I mean, I wish there was some way I could get you my phone number. If you go I tell you what, man, because I don't really want to type it. Well, I guess I can just erase my own comment later, but go to this email. Shoot, I mean, you can probably contact me at that email, John, and then send me that Haley's Bible handbook. And then I can just send you my telephone number and everything, man, because I don't care if you got my telephone number too. But just contact me at that email. And and then we can just get a hold of each other that way. I'd like to have you on a show again. You always got good stuff to say too. So, but anyway, so I guess that's gonna be it. If I get to do a show tomorrow, I'm not even sure what time it'll be. It'll just be whatever time I get to do it, if I even get to do it. So, thanks everyone for watching, and talk to everyone later. If not, next week I'll do a show. All right. Well, John, you got it wrote down by any chance? Because I like to just kind of erase it. It's kind of easy to remember if you can just remember DJ Liquid. If not, you know, I'm just gonna probably go ahead and erase it. But I guess I can't even erase my own comment. Oh well. But yeah, whatever. I guess it is what it is. I thought I could erase my own comments. But thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate it. So I'm gonna end this and talk to everyone later. Hey, CJ, or I think that synagogue guy that was here, the synagogue, TheCynogue, something like that. I think he might be doing a show now. If anyone cares, I can't remember, but later.